What if every tissue in your body could tell its story if you only knew how to read it? Why do so many students struggle to see patterns when cells blur together under the microscope? And if tiny structural differences decide health or disease, then how much can a beginner truly grasp without guidance? Welcome to Rest Academy. Tonight, in 22 Calm Steps, we'll explore the hidden language of tissues from cell to tissue to organ, uncovering how layers stack, how stains reveal hidden details, and how tissues work together to keep your body alive. But here's the deeper question. If every tissue carries secrets in its structure, then what might you be missing when you only glance at the surface? Because these ideas are heavy to hold, I've prepared a free practical guide. You'll find it in the description, like a map you can return to whenever you need it. So take a slow breath. Tonight we begin with the first truth, the structural ladder that builds life from cell to organ. Your fingertips rest on the edge of a glass slide, as if on a balcony railing. Below, a city of purple nuclei and pink proteins stretches in tidy avenues. You sense that order is not accidental. The question quietly pressing is how so many parts are arranged so you stay alive through sleep and stress. You begin at the smallest living unit, the cell. A cell is a membrane-bound compartment that maintains its own internal chemistry while exchanging signals and materials with its surroundings. Cells differ in shape, tools, and duties, yet each must keep a stable interior and respond appropriately to change. One cell is capable, many cells cooperating are powerful. A tissue is a collection of similar cells plus the material between them, the extracellular matrix organized to perform a shared function. Histology is the study of tissues, how their parts look, how they connect, and how form predicts function. Across the body, 4 basic tissues build everything you see on a slide: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Epithelial tissue is a continuous sheet of cells that covers surfaces, lines cavities, and forms glands. It has polarity, an apical side that faces a lumen or the outside world, and a basal side that sits on a specialized layer called the basement membrane. Because epithelial sheets lack internal blood vessels, they depend on diffusion from the connective tissue beneath to obtain oxygen and nutrients. You will see how that constraint shapes thickness, renewal, and vulnerability. Connective tissue is the supportive web surrounding and linking other tissues. It is defined less by crowded cells and more by matrix, the fibers and gel that fill space. That space is not empty. It is a route for fluids, immune cells, and mechanical forces. In connective tissue, you meet fibroblasts that assemble collagen ropes and elastin springs, immune sentinels that patrol an adipocyte storing energy. Strength, elasticity, and permeability emerge from how these elements are mixed. Muscle tissue consists of elongated cells specialized for contraction. The machinery actin and myosin proteins slides to shorten the cell. In skeletal muscle, contractions are voluntary and neatly striated. In cardiac muscle, they are rhythmic and linked through intercellular junctions. In smooth muscle, they are slower, less obviously striped, and tuned to regulate the diameter and tone of hollow organs and vessels. Nervous tissue conducts information. Neurons receive signals on dendrites, integrate them in the cell body, and propagate impulses along axons to communicate at synapses. Around them, glial cells support, insulate, regulate the chemical environment, and participate in defense and repair. Together, they coordinate movement, sensation, and internal balance. Stack these 4 tissues and you form an organ, a structure with a recognizable shape and a focused task. The stomach is a useful example. Its lumen is lined by epithelium that secretes and protects. Beneath, connective tissue carries vessels and immune cells. Smooth muscle mixes and propels. Nervous tissue regulates timing and tone. The layers work as a team, not as isolated stripes. Combine organs with related goals, and you have an organ system. The digestive system, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system. The sum of systems is the organism, you. Why does this hierarchy matter? First, specialization. Each level can refine its role without taking on every task. Second, redundancy and resilience. If one component is stressed, adjacent layers buffer the impact. Third, scale. microscopic changes can influence macroscopic outcomes. A subtle alteration in the basement membrane's composition can shift epithelial behavior. A change in connective tissue water content can slow diffusion and healing. A defect in smooth muscle tone can change pressure upstream. Histology teaches you to read those relationships. Hold the image of a building in mind. Cells are bricks, junctions are mortar. The basement membrane is the slab, connective tissue is the frame, and utilities, muscle is the elevators and moving doors, and nervous tissue is the wiring and control panels. When one element weakens, the others compensate for a time. If two fail together, function falters. In that building, recognizing which layer changed explains why drafts appear, doors stick, or lights dim. On a slide, recognizing which tissue shifted explains symptoms. Consider skin at your ankle that is not healed after minor trauma. The epithelium may be thin or breached, the basement membrane may be disrupted, the connective tissue beneath may be edematous, slowing diffusion, small vessels may be narrowed, reducing delivery, local nerves may be firing persistently, altering microcirculation, multiple layers, one outcome. If a wound persists, becomes painful, warm, or drains, or if you have other concerning symptoms, seeking evaluation by a healthcare professional is important for safe assessment and care. You often look for a single cause, but bodies favor networks. Seeing tissues as cooperating layers invites patience and better questions. What changed first? What adapted next? Which layer now needs protection while others catch up? A quiet reassurance settles in. Once you know where to look, patterns replace noise. The next question is simple and practical. How do you prepare soft living matter so its architecture becomes visible without destroying it? And how do you push light far enough to read the plan? You lift tissue from liquid to glass like a photographer lifting film from a tray. Clarity emerges only if every step before the light is correct. Your puzzle tonight is practical. How do you turn soft, water-rich matter into a thin, stable slice that light can resolve? And why does sharpness stop even when you focus perfectly? First, the tissue must stop changing. Fixation is the chemical pause button that cross-links proteins and immobilizes lipids and nucleic acids so enzymes cannot digest them and molecules cannot drift away. When fixation begins promptly after removal, endogenous enzymes are silenced and bacterial growth is curtailed. When it is delayed, fine structures blur, as if a long exposure smeared the scene. Different fixatives favor different targets. Formaldehyde preserves overall architecture by forming methylene bridges between amino groups. Alcohol-based agents precipitate proteins. Glutaraldehyde, with two reactive ends, secures ultrastructure for high magnification work. The principle is constant. Stabilize before you slice because motion at the molecular scale still ruins pictures. Second, water must yield to a material that can be cut thin. Dehydration replaces water with ascending concentrations of alcohol. Clearing then replaces alcohol with a solvent miscible with both alcohol and paraffin, and embedding infiltrates the tissue with molten paraffin wax. When the wax hardens, the specimen behaves like a firm block of candle instead of a jelly. Each substitution has a purpose. Alcohol pulls out water that would resist wax. The clearing solvent, often xylene or a substitute, makes the tissue receptive to paraffin. Paraffin supplies mechanical rigidity. Omit one step and the blade tears. Rush a step and the matrix fractures. Overdo a step and lipids vanish, leaving crisp holes that look like disease but are simply empty. Now the block meets the microtome. Microtomy is controlled shaving. A steel or diamond blade advances through the block, producing ribbons of tissue sections typically a few micrometers thick. Thickness matters because light microscopy resolves features only when enough photons emerge from structures thinner than their own spacing. At Teamshooter 5 micrometers, most cells appear in interpretable cross-sections. Orientation matters just as much. A tubule cut longitudinally looks like a track. The same tubule cut transversely looks like a ring. The plane you choose dictates the shapes you will swear you saw. For fragile or urgent samples, cryosectioning offers a faster route. The tissue is rapidly frozen, mounted on a chilled stage, and cut without paraffin. Ice gives temporary stiffness and preserves lipids and enzymes, but ice crystals can pucker membranes and generate artifactual spaces like frost on a window, distorting a streetlight. Sections float on a warm water bath to relax wrinkles, then settle onto a glass slide. Heat adheres the tissue and smooths remaining ripples. Because paraffin repels water and most stains are water-based, the section must be deparaffinized and rehydrated in reverse. Xylene or substitute removes wax, descending alcohols reintroduce water, and the tissue becomes ready to accept dyes. After staining, dehydration and clearing return. A drop of mounting medium goes on, and a cover slip seals the preparation. That thin glass not only protects, it defines the optical path that determines how light will focus. Light's ability to distinguish two close points has a hard ceiling, described by Abbe's relation. The smallest resolvable distance is proportional to the wavelength of light and inversely proportional to the numerical aperture Na of the lens. Wavelength is the color. Shorter wavelengths carry finer detail. Na is a lens property that captures how much light and angular information can enter. It depends on the refractive index of the medium between the specimen and lens and the lens geometry. Air has a refractive index around 1. Immersion oil matches glass more closely and raises effective Na. When you add a drop of oil and use an oil immersion objective, you allow rays at steeper angles to reach the lens, narrowing the point spread and sharpening detail. Even then, visible light and practical NAs set a floor for lateral resolution on the order of fractions of a micrometer. You can focus perfectly and still not separate two structures if physics says they blend. Because biological tissues are nearly transparent when unstained, contrast is the other limit. Bright field microscopy, the most familiar setup, creates contrast where dyes absorb light. Alternative modalities create contrast by altering phase rather than absorption. Phase contrast translates tiny differences in refractive index into brightness changes, revealing unstained live cells and cilia motion without adding color. Differential interference contrast uses pairs of sheared beams to render edges with relief-like sensitivity, good for membranes and fine fibers. Confocal systems scan with a spot of light and reject out-of-focus photons with a pinhole, tightening the optical section and enabling stacks through thick specimens, yet laterally they remain bound by diffraction. Electron microscopes abandon photons and their relatively long wavelengths for electrons, achieving far finer resolution, but at the cost of living dynamics, color, and the familiar workflow. For routine histology and pathology, light's balance of speed, context, and safety wins. Artifacts lurk everywhere and must be recognized so you do not mistake preparation for pathology. Knife chatter produces evenly spaced ripples like corrugations. Folds create double layers that thicken one region and thin another. Air bubbles under the cover slip form circles with dark rims. Overstretching on the water bath elongates nuclei along one axis. Shrinkage from dehydration pulls epithelium away from stroma, mimicking edema or clefts. Each artifact has a backstory in physics or chemistry. Expansion when warm, contraction when dry, surface tension in the bath, friction at the edge of steel. You learn to ask, does this repeat with geometry and spacing typical of tools, or with distribution typical of disease? Consider a small skin biopsy sent for margin assessment. If it sits warm for hours before fixation, enzymes blur nuclear detail, cytoplasm vacuolates, and edges curl. An underprocessed block resists the blade and tears near the critical inked margin. A pathologist reading both tissue and artifact may report non-diagnostic and recommend a new specimen. That decision protects you. Unclear edges could miss residual lesion. When results and symptoms do not align, or when a report specifically notes limited evaluation, clinicians decide whether to repeat sampling or choose a different modality for clarity. The optics have one more quiet constraint. The refractive indices of glass slide, mounting medium, cover slip, and the tissue's own components must be close enough to avoid excessive scattering, but different enough across structures to permit contrast once stained. Too much mismatch and image blur increases. Too little and you see a low contrast fog. The craft of histology tunes this balance so that light enters, interacts, and exits as a legible signal. Now return to the camera metaphor. Fixation is your tripod stability first. Processing is ISO and shutter. Set sensitivity and timing. Embedding is the frame. Hold the subject steady. Sectioning is focus. Choose the plane. Microscopy is the lens. Collect the right angles of light. And resolution is the diffraction limit, the wall you cannot push through by wishing. You compose within constraints, and within them you find consistent, reliable beauty. Reflection. Constraints calm attention. When you accept the limits of light and prepare tissue accordingly, uncertainty narrows. You stop chasing perfect sharpness and start reading reliable patterns, which is the real source of confidence. You now have a thin section on a slide and a beam of light ready to reveal structure. The remaining question is simple but decisive. What colors and chemistries will write meaning into this pale scene so nuclei, proteins, and carbohydrates speak clearly? The first colors hit like a quiet sunrise: nuclei, blue-violet; cytoplasm, soft pink; red cells, a lucid salmon. You are not looking at art, you are reading chemistry. The task is to learn what these colors truly encode and where silence remains until you add the right dye to ask a sharper question. Hematoxylin and eosin, H&E, is the default language of slides. Hematoxylin, after oxidation and complexing with a mordant such as aluminum, behaves as a basic dye that binds anionic sites, most abundantly nucleic acids. Structures rich in DNA and RNA take on a deep blue to purple. This property is called basophilia. Eosin is an acidic dye that binds caconic proteins, especially abundant in cytoplasm and extracellular matrix. Such structures become pink to red and are termed eosinophilic. With only these two colors, you separate information by charge. Polyanions glow cool, proteinaceous fields warm. This is enough to orient yourself. Nucleus here, cytoplasm there, collagen strands coursing between. The palette has nuances. Nucleoli, dense ribosomal factories, often stain even darker than the nuclear chromatin. Rough endoplasmic reticulum and protein-secreting cells can be basophilic, lending those cytoplasms a lavender tint. Red blood cells look intensely eosinophilic because hemoglobin is a concentrated basic protein complex. Smooth muscle fibers pick up eosin, but with a satin, evenly granular quality. Collagen takes a slightly brighter fibrous pink. Elastic fibers are inconspicuous unless thick. You begin to see not just color but texture: granular, fibrillar, glassy, or vacuolated, each a clue. Yet H&E is a generalist. Lipids are often extracted by processing, leaving empty, clear spaces. Glycogen can be washed away or remain pale. Acidic mucins may look glassy but nonspecific. Elastic fibers blend into the background. Basement membranes and reticular fibers are hinted at rather than crisply outlined. Microbes may vanish into the noise. When the question needs a targeted answer, special stains become your question-specific vocabulary. Begin with carbohydrates. Periodic acid Schiff. PAS oxidizes certain sugar moieties to aldehydes that then react with Schiff reagent to produce a magenta color. Basement membranes, neutral mucins, glycogen, and fungal walls light up. Because glycogen can mimic other PAS-positive materials, you confirm specificity by diastase digestion. Diastase removes glycogen. Signal that persists suggests something else. Basement membrane or mucin. Alcyon blue stains acidic mucins by ionic interaction. At pH 2.5, it captures both carboxylated and sulfated mucins, while at pH 1.0, it favors strongly sulfated species. Combining Alcyon blue with PAS ABPAS separates acidic blue from neutral magenta mucins in one field. Mucicarmine selectively highlights epithelial mucins in carmine red, useful in glands and certain pathogens that cloak themselves in mucin. Collagen and muscle ask for trichromes. Masson trichrome paints nuclei dark, cytoplasm and muscle red, collagen blue or green depending on the variant. It converts a vague pink stroma into crisp connective tissue maps, letting you measure fibrosis, capsule thickness, and scar. Van Giesen stains collagen bright red with a yellow counterstain for muscle. It pairs elegantly with elastic stains. Reticulin, a delicate collagen type 3 mesh supporting organs like liver and marrow, emerges with silver impregnation, Gomori reticulin, turning fine frameworks black and clarifying architecture such as hepatic plates or marrow sinusoids. Elastic fibers, the quiet springs in vessels and skin, come alive with Verhoef, Van Giesen, or Orson, laying down black ribbons that reveal internal elastic lamina integrity and elastic fragmentation in vasculitides or aneurysms. Minerals and pigments carry their own signals. Prussian blue pearls converts ferric iron and hemosiderin to an insoluble blue pigment. It unmasks occult iron overload in liver, spleen, or marrow, and maps prior hemorrhage in tissues where macrophages have stored iron. Von Cosa uses silver reduction to visualize phosphate and calcified deposits as black, while Alizar and Red S directly chelates calcium to an orange red. Melanin and other argentaphane substances reduce ammoniacal silver in Fontana-Masson, turning brown-black. If you need to distinguish melanin from lipofuscin or formalin pigment, controlled bleaching can help. Mast cells rich in sulfated glycosaminoglycans show metachromasia with toluidine blue. The dye shifts from blue to purple-red upon binding. The color change is itself a test. Lipids need a different approach because paraffin processing dissolves them. In frozen sections, oil red O and Sudan black B dissolve into neutral fats and stain them vivid red or black. Suddenly, adipocytes are not empty rings but filled circles. Lipid-laden macrophages in lung or atherosclerotic plaques stand out. Myelin-rich regions in peripheral nerves become conspicuous. Osmium tetroxide, used in electron microscopy and some light protocols, both fixes and darkens unsaturated lipids, preserving membranes and fat droplets that would otherwise disappear. Microorganisms do not announce themselves in H&E unless numerous. The Gram stain differentiates bacteria by cell wall properties into purple gram-positive and pink gram-negative. Its tissue variants, e.g. brown hops, improve visibility in sections. Zeal-Nielsen and the more delicate Phyte methods detect acid-fast organisms like mycobacteria by resisting decolorization with acid alcohol. Their waxy walls hold carbofucsin, glowing pink against a blue background. Fungi and pneumocystis stand out in Grocott methenamine silver, GMS, as black or dark brown silhouettes with crisp walls. Pay-As also reveals them but with less contrast. Spirochaetes can be caught with silver methods such as Warthin-Starry or Steiner. Helicobacter pylori appears on Giemsa and gastric mucosa as curved rods near the epithelium. Each choice flows from a question: bacteria, mycobacteria, fungi. You stain to test a hypothesis, not to decorate. Sometimes the question is about organization, not identity. In kidney biopsies, Pay-As outlines glomerular basement membranes and mesangial matrix. Silver-Jones methenamine enhances basement membrane contours and reveals spikes or double contours. Trichrome separates fibrosis from viable parenchyma. Special elastics show arterial elastic laminae. Congo Red detects amyloid. Congo Red is unique. It binds beta-pleated sheet structures and under polarized light exhibits apple green birefringence, a physical, not just chemical signature. Thioflavin T, a fluorescent dye, offers another way to see amyloid with high sensitivity. Color depends on pH, timing, and the chemical state of the target. Over-differentiation in trichrome fades collagen, under-differentiation muddies contrast. Alcyon blue selectivity shifts with pH. pH requires proper oxidation. Silver stains are notoriously temperamental, influenced by water purity, glass cleanliness, and even ambient temperature. Controls, slides with known positive tissue processed in parallel, anchor interpretation. Without them, a negative result may reflect chemistry, not biology. Imagine you are reviewing a liver needle core from a patient with unexplained fatigue and elevated ferritin. H&E shows subtle ballooning of hepatocytes and patchy inflammation. It hints at brown granular pigment in Kupffer cells but leaves doubt. Prussian blue floods those granules a decisive blue, confirming iron accumulation, and trichrome grades background fibrosis. If the patient also has yellowing of the eyes, dark urine, or abdominal pain, prompt clinical evaluation is essential. Histology informs care, but new or worsening symptoms need professional assessment. Stains are not decorations, they are directed questions. When you choose them thoughtfully, color becomes evidence rather than ornament, and each hue narrows uncertainty with quiet authority. Now the slide before you is colored by charge, sugar, fiber, and metal. Forms stand out with new clarity. The next problem is architectural. How does a sheet of cells without blood vessels hold together, feed itself across a thin membrane, and seal the outside from the inside while still allowing selected exchange? Your eyes trace a continuous shoreline, a glossy surface facing a lumen, an anchoring strip beneath, and tidy seams stitching neighbors together. Think of an engineered seawall. One face meets waves, one side bolts to bedrock, and interlocking blocks prevent leaks. Epithelia use the same logic: a specialized top, apical domain, a foundation basal domain and basement membrane, and lateral junctions that seal and coordinate. Polarity is the first principle. Polarity means one cell divides its surface into distinct regions with different proteins and tasks. The apical domain faces a lumen or the outside world and carries transporters, channels, and sometimes projections such as microvilli or cilia. The lateral domain contacts neighboring cells and contains junctional complexes. The basal domain contacts a specialized extracellular matrix and houses receptors that attach and signal. Polarity is established and maintained by conserved protein assemblies, PR, crumbs, and scribble complexes that act like site managers, directing where channels, pumps, and junctions should live, and preventing mix-ups that would blur function. Beneath the basal surface lies the basement membrane, a thin but strong sheet that performs two jobs at once. It anchors and it informs. Structurally, it includes a basal lamina, rich in laminins, type 4 collagen, nitogen, and heparan sulfate proteoglycans, and, often, a reticular lamina, type 3 collagen, contributed by the underlying connective tissue. Laminins form networks that bind integrins, transmembrane receptors on epithelial cells, creating hemidesmos and focal adhesions. Hemidesmos tether the cytoskeleton's intermediate filaments to the membrane through linker proteins, distributing force broadly. Focal adhesions link actin filaments to matrix and engage signaling pathways that tune growth and migration. The membrane filters by size and charge, guides cell alignment, and provides cues that steer differentiation and repair. Because epithelia are avascular, without internal blood vessels, nutrients and oxygen diffuse from capillaries and the underlying connective tissue across the basement membrane into basal cytoplasm and then to apical regions. The distance is small, but the gradient matters. Thick epithelia must manage with short diffusion paths or rely on frequent renewal. This constraint explains why exchange epithelia are thin and why protective stratified sheets renew briskly near their base. Lateral seams do more than glue. At the apical lateral border sits the tight junction, also called the zonula occludens, a belt-like seal formed by claudins and occludin linked to scaffold proteins such as ZO1 and the actin cytoskeleton. Tight junctions control paracellular flow, the path between cells, creating epithelia that are leaky or tight depending on claudin composition. In the proximal tubule of kidney, specific claudins permit substantial salt and water passage. In urinary bladder and certain ducts, different claudins create high resistance to protect composition and prevent loss. Tight junctions also fence membrane proteins, preserving polarity by preventing apical proteins from drifting into lateral or basal domains. Just basal to tight junctions lies the adherence junction, zonula adherens, another circumferential belt where eq-adherent molecules from adjacent cells bind each other like Velcro, with catenins linking the complex to actin. This belt can contract like a drawstring, altering cell shape to bend sheets into tubes or invaginations during development and repair. Deeper still sit desmosomes, spot welds built from desmogleins and desmocollins connecting to intermediate filaments, keratins, and epithelia. Desmosomes provide punctate, shear-resistant strength, especially in tissues exposed to abrasion such as epidermis and mucosa. Completing the set are gap junctions, arrays of connexin channels that align to form pores between cells, allowing ions and small molecules to pass directly, synchronizing responses across the sheet. Viewed together from lumen inward, the junctional complex typically orders as tight junction, adherence junction, then desmosome, a stack that both seals and stabilizes. Interdigitating lateral membranes increase contact area, further strengthening adhesion and creating tortuous parcellular pathways that discourage uncontrolled leaks. Apical specializations match tasks. Microvilli are finger-like membrane projections supported by actin bundles anchored to a terminal web. They expand surface area to accelerate absorption, for example in small intestine and kidney. When packed densely, the apical fringe looks like a brush border in light microscopy. Cilia are longer, motile projections with a 9+2 microtubule arrangement. Driven by dynein motors, they beat in coordinated waves to move mucus or fluid, for example along respiratory tract or uterine tube. Non-motile primary cilia act as sensory antennae in many epithelia, sampling flow and chemical cues to adjust behavior. Transcellular and paracellular routes divide transport labor. Transcellular transport uses apical and basolateral channels, carriers, and pumps. to move solutes through the cell, often coupled to gradients set by the ne planace capace on the basolateral membrane. Paracellular transport passes between cells under the rules imposed by tight junction composition and electrochemical forces. The balance between these routes defines each epithelium's transepithelial electrical resistance Tr, a measurable property that reflects leakiness or tightness and predicts how fluids and solutes traverse the sheet. Signals flow both ways across the basement membrane. Integrin engagement triggers intracellular pathways, for example, focal adhesion kinase and MEP kinases that influence proliferation, survival, and polarity. In turn, epithelial cells deposit and remodel matrix, adjusting stiffness and composition. Increased matrix stiffness can drive cells toward more motile, less adhesive states, while a healthy elastic membrane encourages orderly renewal and stratification. During repair, basal cells migrate over the membrane using focal adhesions, then re-establish hemidesmos as the sheet stabilizes. When seams or anchors fail, structure betrays function. In blistering disorders, antibodies may target desmogleins, severing desmosomes or hemidesmosomal components, weakening attachment to basement membrane. The result is splitting within or below the epithelium, forming fragile or tense blisters depending on the level. Similar tears can arise from toxins, severe inflammation, or inherited defects in keratins. If you notice widespread fragile skin, painful erosions in the mouth, or new, easily ruptured blisters, a prompt professional evaluation is important. Early assessment helps identify the level of separation and the underlying process safely. The seawall image helps you parse common scenes. In small intestine, the apical face grows villi and microvilli to meet nutrient-laden waves. Tight junctions are selective, not absolute, allowing controlled paracellular passage of water and ions. The lateral drawstring contracts during absorption cycles, modulating lumen caliber at a microscopic scale. The basal anchors sit atop a supple basement membrane that guides renewal from crypt stem cells. In the respiratory tract, ciliated apical surfaces sweep mucus produced by goblet cells. Tight junctions protect composition, while desmosomes absorb the shear of airflow. In bladder, umbrella cells at the surface deploy plaques and tight junctions to resist solute and water flux as volume rises. When the wall stretches, the membrane unfolds without breaking the seal. Order at the micrometer scale creates safety at the organism scale. When you understand the face, seams, and foundation of epithelia, symptoms that once felt mysterious begin to map to a specific surface or seam, and calm returns to your reading. You now stand at the edge of the thinnest shorelines, epithelia designed for nearly effortless passage. What happens when you trade armor for speed, and how does a 2-micrometer film balance diffusion against the risk of rupture under pressure? You look through a window so thin it almost stops being a thing, just air on one side and blood on the other. Simple squamous epithelium is that window, a single flattened layer of cells built to minimize distance and maximize passage. Simple squamous epithelium means one cell layer, simple of plate-like cells, squamous. The shape reduces thickness, the uniformity reduces obstacles. This design favors diffusion, the passive movement of molecules down a concentration gradient, and filtration, the pressure-driven separation of water and small solutes from larger components. Lubrication is a third service. These cells can secrete a slick fluid that lets adjacent surfaces glide without heat or wear. The same geometry that speeds exchange also invites fragility. Your task is to see both sides of that bargain. Start with the alveolar capillary unit and lung. Here type Y pneumocytes, the simple squamous cells lining most alveoli, lie against an exceptionally thin basement membrane, fused with the basement membrane of the capillary endothelium. Endothelium is the simple squamous lining of blood vessels. Its continuity and signaling make it more than a passive tube. Between air and a chenoerythrocyte lies a composite film, surfactant at the air interface, the type Y cell, the shared basement membrane, the endothelial cell, a thin plasma layer, and the red cell membrane. Fick's law describes the logic. Flux rises with surface area and gradient, and falls with thickness. The lung invests in area with millions of alveoli. It protects gradients by moving air and blood continuously. It trims thickness by pressing two squamous sheets together with a shared matrix. When oxygen demand rises, capillaries recruit and flatten further, red cells align to increase contact, and microvessels dilate. When demand falls, the same unit rests without losing readiness. Endothelium is not merely a barrier. It senses shear stress, force from flowing blood through structures that tug on the cytoskeleton and trigger nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide diffuses to smooth muscle and relaxes it, adjusting vessel diameter to flow. The endothelial surface also carries a glycocalyx, a carbohydrate-rich coat that repels cells and proteins, maintains a quiet antithrombotic state, and participates in fluid exchange by acting as a molecular sieve. In systemic capillaries, tightness varies. Continuous capillaries in muscle and brain favor controlled passage. Fenestrated capillaries in kidney and endocrine organs permit higher flux. Sinusoidal capillaries in liver and marrow allow even larger particles to traverse. Each variant maintains the squamous plan while tuning porosity and support. Filtration in kidney clarifies the trade-offs. In the renal corpuscle, blood enters a tuft of fenestrated capillaries wrapped by a specialized epithelium with foot processes. Between them sits a thick basement membrane. The filtration barrier has three components in series: endothelial fenestrations, the shared basement membrane, and slit diaphragms between epithelial foot processes. Hydrostatic pressure pushes water and small solutes across, while larger proteins and cells are retained. The parietal layer of Bowman's capsule, a simple squamous sheet, lines the outer wall, forming a smooth collection surface. The goal is speed with selectivity. Thin structures and large area expedite flow. Charge and pore size preserve composition. When the basement membrane swells or slit diaphragms fail, selectivity erodes, proteins leak, downstream segments must cope. Lubrication belongs to mesothelium, the simple squamous lining of pleura, pericardium, and peritoneum. Mesothelium secretes serous fluid and expresses surface molecules that reduce friction and discourage adhesion. Its basement membrane and submesothelial connective tissue permit rapid fluid turnover, immune surveillance, and quiet movement. When inflamed, the smooth glass becomes rough. Surfaces scrape rather than slide. You hear a rub and feel pain with each breath or heartbeat. The thinness that normally makes movement effortless now transmits irritation plainly. The thin window analogy explains vulnerability. In alveoli, excessive pressure differentials can tear the interface, admitting air to interstitial spaces. In capillaries, spikes in pressure force fluid across, overwhelming lymphatic return and creating edema. In serous cavities, inflammation increases permeability and fluid accumulates. Thinness helps until forces exceed the capacity of anchors and seams. Repair relies on nearby cells migrating, proliferating, and laying new basement membrane. In alveoli, type 2 pneumocytes, shorter, metabolically active cells, resupply surfactant and can divide to replace type 1 cells, restoring the window after injury. Order at interfaces comes from junctions even in this minimalist design. Squamous cells still knit with tight junctions to control paracellular path and with adherence junctions to coordinate shape, though their lateral borders appear less conspicuous than taller epithelia. Hemidesmos secure the sheet to the basement membrane. Loss of these attachments invites shearing. The basement membrane itself is a tuned film. Type 4 collagen lends network strength. Laminins organize cell attachment. Heparan sulfate proteoglycans provide charge selectivity and water binding capacity that influence filtration and diffusion. Alter the matrix and you alter performance. Stiffness rises, signaling shifts, permeability changes. The geometry also sets rules for what can be stored or displayed. Squamous cytoplasm is sparse. Organelles cluster near the nucleus. These cells are not designed for heavy synthesis or storage. They prioritize passage. That is why transport tasks demanding pumps, channels, and vesicle traffic concentrate in epithelia with more volume, such as cuboidal cells of renal tubules. Squamous cells can endocytose and transcytose transport material across in vesicles, and endothelium uses caveolae for this, but efficiency is modest compared to taller cells with broader apical and basolateral platforms. Consider a practical scene. A traveler returns from a long flight with sudden pleuritic chest pain and shortness of breath. The endothelium of deep leg veins may have supported clot formation during stasis. A fragment can travel to pulmonary arteries, abruptly increasing pressure and stressing downstream capillaries. The squamous window now sits behind a dam. Gas exchange falls because perfusion is blocked even if the alveolar side is clear. Sharp, one-sided chest pain, breathlessness at rest, coughing blood, or fainting are warning signs that warrant urgent medical evaluation. Symptoms like these need professional assessment to investigate serious causes safely. Another scene, a patient with swelling in both ankles late in the day and fine crackles at the lung bases. Elevated venous pressure increases capillary hydrostatic pressure, fluid filters across endothelium and accumulates in interstitium. Lymphatics struggle to keep pace. In the lung, interstitial fluid thickens the window, turning a whisper-thin pain into a blurred sheet. Oxygen diffusion slows. The change is mechanical and chemical. Managing it involves the entire cardiovascular and renal systems working in concert under clinical guidance. In the serous cavities, thinness yields a different story. After abdominal inflammation, mesothelial cells can be lost or covered with fibrin without their slick coat, viscera stick. Over time, adhesions tether loops of bowel. The mesothelium's usual low-friction promise depends on intact cells, controlled permeability, and quiet signaling with nearby immune cells. When the scene is loud, cytokines exudate, bacterial products, the pain is no longer smooth glass but fogged and sticky. The elegance of simple squamous epithelium is that it solves three problems with one plan: minimize distance to speed diffusion, spread wide to increase area, and secrete just enough to reduce drag. Each location then adjusts details. Lungs fuse membranes, kidneys sculpt pores and slits, serosa polishes surfaces. Where precise composition must be altered, beat by beat or molecule by molecule, this plan gives way to thicker cells that can host more machinery. Thinness is not emptiness, it is intentional design. When you see a flat cell, imagine a crafted pane tuned to the forces and flows it must face, and read the clarity or haze as information. You have traced the thinnest windows that let gases and water pass with minimal delay. The next layer of the map raises a quiet question. When the job is to reabsorb and secrete solutes all day long, why does a square, fuller cell outperform a flatter tile? You peer into a tubule shaped like a garden hose, its inner lining made of orderly square cells with round, centered nuclei. These are simple cuboidal epithelial cells, single-layered, block-like units optimized not for protection or speed, but for precise, regulated transport. Their geometry, though modest, supports a dense architecture of pumps, channels, and vesicles that move solutes against gradients, reclaim filtered substances, and secrete selected molecules into lumens. Cuboidal means cube-shaped. From the side, these cells appear as squares with nuclei centered in the middle. From above, they often look polygonal, depending on the packing. Simple confirms that there is only one layer, meaning each cell touches both the basement membrane below and the lumen above. The uniformity and moderate volume grant just enough space for organelles without compromising packing density or pericellular control. In places like kidney tubules, thyroid follicles, and small ducts of glands, this balance makes cuboidal cells the workhorses of reabsorption and selective secretion. Start with the proximal convoluted tubule in the kidney cortex. Here the cuboidal epithelial cells reclaim filtered glucose, amino acids, sodium, and bicarbonate while secreting hydrogen ions and organic acids into the lumen. Their apical surfaces carry microvilli, forming a dense brush border that increases surface area for absorption. This fringe is not just structural, it contains transporters, enzymes, and anchoring sites for vesicular traffic. Basolaterally, these cells host Na plus K-PES apace pumps that maintain gradients, allowing sodium-linked cotransport of glucose and amino acids at the apical side. Mitochondria cluster near the basal surface, fueling ATP-dependent processes. The overall effect is one of quiet intensity, massive daily volumes of filtrate processed by small, square cells arranged like tiles in a pipe. Unlike the flatter squamous cells, cuboidal epithelia offer more room for internal machinery. They can host endosomes, lysosomes, Golgi bodies, and a well-developed endoplasmic reticulum, making them suitable for hormone synthesis, vesicle packaging, and regulated release. In the thyroid gland, for example, cuboidal cells line spherical follicles filled with colloid, a reservoir of thyroglobulin. These cells uptake iodide, process it, iodinate tyrosines and thyroglobulin, and later reabsorb colloid to release active hormone. The same basic cuboidal plan, reconfigured slightly, delivers systemic endocrine signals. The apical and basolateral domains remain polarized. with distinct protein compositions. Apical surfaces may have few or many microvilli depending on absorptive demand. Lateral surfaces contain adhesion molecules and often interdigitations that increase contact area with neighbors. These interdigitations, when viewed in section, can make the lateral membranes appear indistinct, blending cells into a continuous sheet unless stained with membrane-specific markers. Basement membrane integrity is essential. Cuboidal cells depend on matrix-derived signals to maintain polarity and proliferation. In renal tubules, for example, ischemia or toxins that damage the basement membrane can lead to dedifferentiation and flattening of the cuboidal epithelium. These cells can regenerate if the scaffold remains, but misaligned or absent matrix disrupts reassembly. Tubular atrophy results when cells cannot reattach or when fibrosis replaces the normal matrix. Simple cuboidal cells also appear in exocrine ducts, where their role shifts slightly toward conduit modification. In salivary glands, sweat glands, and pancreas, ductal cuboidal cells adjust ionic composition, reabsorbing sodium, secreting potassium or bicarbonate, and fine-tuning pH or osmolality. Their square profile permits tight control without adding bulk. Unlike acinar secretory cells, which often appear pyramidal and protein-rich, ductal cuboidal cells are quieter but no less important. They make secretions functional. In the ovary, cuboidal epithelium forms the surface layer, once called germinal epithelium, though it does not give rise to germ cells. Here, cuboidal cells endure monthly cycles of rupture and repair as follicles ovulate. The epithelial regeneration must be swift and orderly, yet it leaves traces in vaginations and inclusion cysts that accumulate with age. In rare cases, neoplastic transformation here can lead to epithelial ovarian cancers, which highlight how modest renewing epithelia can become sites of serious pathology. Consider a quiet gland. A sweat gland's secretory coil lies deep in the dermis. Its duct spirals upward through the epidermis. The ductal lining is composed of cuboidal epithelium that reabsorbs sodium and chloride from the primary secretion, concentrating the sweat and adjusting its ionic content. On hot days, these cells process liters of fluid without notice, maintaining homeostasis invisibly. If they fail due to genetic defects in ion channels, inflammation, or injury, sweat becomes dilute or salty, skin may macerate, and electrolyte balance may shift. Now observe the pancreas. Cuboidal cells line intercalated ducts, inserting bicarbonate-rich fluid into enzyme-laden secretions to neutralize gastric acid in the duodenum. They do not synthesize digestive enzymes, that's the acinar cell's job, but without them pancreatic juice would burn or stall. Their role is support, not spectacle. When ductal cells atrophy or become obstructed, enzymes accumulate, pressure rises, and pancreatitis ensues. Quiet ducts, when blocked, speak loudly. In thyroid pathology, the cuboidal shape itself becomes diagnostic. Active follicles have tall cuboidal or columnar epithelium with scant colloid and pronounced vacuolization. Resting follicles show flatter cuboidal or even squamous cells with colloid densely packed. Histologists read shape and content together. What is the cell doing, and what did it do recently? A change in height can reflect systemic metabolic shifts or local regulatory failures. Even in cuboidal epithelium, variations exist. Some are ciliated, especially in the respiratory bronchioles or reproductive tract, where cilia help propel fluid or cells. Others carry specialized microdomains with apical vesicles for regulated secretion or endocytosis. Despite their simple profile, cuboidal cells adapt widely across organs, holding a central role in maintaining internal chemistry. Imagine a patient with excessive urination and thirst. In nephron tubules, cuboidal cells must reclaim water and solutes efficiently. If damaged by toxins or ischemia, reabsorption falters. The body compensates by increasing flow and signal, but losses outpace returns. The patient may develop fatigue, dehydration, or electrolyte imbalance. If symptoms persist or worsen, medical evaluation is necessary to distinguish tubular injury from other causes and ensure safe care. Cubes are quiet powerhouses. Their geometry allows balance, enough space for machinery, enough compactness for layering. When reabsorption or secretion matters, the cell's shape is no accident, it is a statement of purpose. From the simple cube, your attention now rises vertically. What happens when height increases and organelles shift baseward? How does this columnar shape create one of the body's most finely tuned absorptive and secretory interfaces? A tall column stands along a narrow street, each unit identical in height, nucleus anchored at the base, surface brushed with fine projections. This is simple columnar epithelium, a single layer of elongated cells specialized for absorption, secretion, and subtle sensing. Height here is not ornamental, it is functional, expanding apical and basal surfaces to host machinery where both precision and capacity matter. Columnar means the cell's height exceeds its width, often by 2 to 3 times. The nucleus typically sits near the basal third, aligned neatly with its neighbors. From the side, you see vertical stacks. From above, you see packed hexagons. As with other simple epithelia, every cell touches the basement membrane, preserving a direct line for diffusion and signaling. The added cytoplasmic volume allows a denser, more segregated distribution of organelles, apically enzymes and transporters, basally mitochondria and biosynthetic organelles. You find columnar epithelia lining most of the gastrointestinal GI tract from stomach to rectum, as well as in the uterus, uterine tubes, bronchi, and select glandular ducts. The common thread is directional flow of nutrients, mucus, sperm, or inhaled air, and the need to modify, absorb, or protect that stream. Begin with the small intestine. Enterocytes, the main absorptive cells, are columnar and packed with microvilli. These apical extensions form a brush border, visible under light microscopy, and massively expand surface area by up to 20-fold for digestion and absorption. Embedded in the membrane and just beneath it are enzymes, e.g. disaccharidases, peptidases, transporters, e.g. LT1 for glucose, and anchoring proteins for actin filaments. The core of each microvillus contains actin bundles linked to the terminal web, a subapical actin-rich region that helps maintain shape and participates in vesicle trafficking. Mitochondria cluster near the basal pole, supporting energy-dependent transport. Nutrients cross the apical membrane via facilitated diffusion or active transport, traverse the cytoplasm, and exit basolaterally to enter capillaries or lacteals. Tight junctions near the apical edge preserve polarity and regulate paracellular flow, determining what slips between cells rather than through them. Each cell acts as a highly tuned gatekeeper. Interspersed among enterocytes are goblet cells, also columnar but swollen at the apical end due to mucin granules. These cells synthesize and secrete mucins, glycoproteins that hydrate to form mucus. The apical cytoplasm releases its contents via exocytosis, coating the surface and protecting it from enzymatic digestion and microbial invasion. In histological sections, goblet cells appear pale or foamy due to their mucin content. With PAS or alcium blue staining, they glow vividly. Their spacing and density vary by region and exposure, more in colon than jejunum, more in response to irritation or inflammation. Columnar epithelia in the stomach are adapted to a different task: protection and secretion. The surface mucus cells of the gastric epithelium secrete bicarbonate-rich mucus to buffer acid and maintain pH near the epithelial surface. Deeper in the gastric glands, other columnar cells produce hydrochloric acid, intrinsic factor, and pepsinogen. The same vertical plan supports diverse outputs depending on location and stimulation. In the uterus, ciliated simple columnar epithelium lines the endometrium and participates in moving uterine secretions and, during fertility windows, sperm or zygotes. In the uterine tube, both ciliated and secretory columnar cells cooperate. Cilia beat directionally to move the ovum, while PEG cells secrete nutritive and protective substances. The cilia here are true motile cilia with a 9+2 microtubule core, driven by dynein ATPases, producing coordinated wave-like motion. The direction of beat is fixed during development and maintained by structural polarity cues. In the bronchi, columnar epithelium again blends absorptive and ciliated features. Ciliated columnar cells sweep mucus cephalid, goblet cells contribute mucins, basal cells which sit on the basement membrane but do not reach the lumen act as progenitors. This mixture of cell types within a single layer demonstrates the flexibility of the columnar plan. Pseudostratified epithelia, addressed shortly, expand on this concept further. Polarity governs everything. The apical surface handles incoming material, the lateral surfaces manage cohesion and communication, the basal side integrates signals from the matrix and directs output. This vectorial layout allows unidirectional transport of ions, nutrients, and macromolecules, and focused responses to stress or infection. For example, toll-like receptors on the apical surface detect microbial patterns and activate local defenses without triggering systemic responses unless warranted. A quiet but essential task is sampling and immune coordination. In the small intestine, specialized columnar M cells overlay lymphoid nodules, Peyer's patches, and transport antigens from the lumen to underlying immune cells. Though rare, these cells highlight the surveillance function embedded in absorptive epithelia. Columnar epithelia regenerate actively. Stem cells reside near the base of crypts and intestine or glandular necks and stomach, dividing asymmetrically to produce both progenitors and differentiating cells. Cells migrate upward over days, maturing as they go, and are shed at the apical surface. This renewal preserves barrier integrity, allows rapid adaptation, and dilutes damage. In settings of chronic injury or inflammation, this system may hyperactivate, producing hyperplasia or metaplasia. Changes that, while initially adaptive, can predispose to dysplasia and malignancy. Imagine a patient with unexplained diarrhea and weight loss. A biopsy reveals flattened villi, lost brush border, and crypt hyperplasia, features consistent with celiac disease. Here, immune responses to dietary antigens damage the columnar epithelium, reducing surface area and absorptive capacity. Malabsorption follows. If symptoms persist, chronic diarrhea, bloating, fatigue, or unexplained anemia, professional evaluation is essential. Histology can clarify the mechanism, but treatment must follow clinical interpretation. In another scenario, a smoker develops persistent cough and sputum. The bronchi, lined with ciliated columnar epithelium, may undergo squamous metaplasia, replacing ciliated cells with squamous ones that better resist irritation but lack clearance function. Mucus builds, infections recur, and chronic inflammation deepens. This adaptive change has costs. Identifying such transitions early, often through endoscopy or cytology, can prompt safer interventions. Height holds secrets. In columnar epithelium, verticality is not about space, it's about control. When direction matters, when you must absorb, sense, secrete, and move, all in one breath, a column is your quiet engineer. You've now seen orderly, absorbing columns perform with nuance, but what happens when the plan looks layered, yet every cell still touches the base? How does a crowded airway epithelium fake stratification and still function as one? You scan across an airway section and pause. This epithelium looks stratified, with nuclei at different heights, some near the basement membrane, others mid-column. Yet each cell, when traced carefully, touches the base. This is pseudostratified columnar epithelium, a single layer that mimics stratification while retaining functional unity. Among its crowded occupants are ciliated movers, mucus makers, and silent sentinels, working in concert to defend your most exposed passages. Pseudostratified means falsely layered. Though the nuclei sit at varying heights, and some cells don't reach the apical surface, every cell anchors to the basement membrane. This organization allows diverse functions to stack vertically without true stratification, preserving a thin diffusion barrier while multiplying capabilities. Most commonly, this epithelium is ciliated, forming pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, especially in the trachea, bronchi, and upper respiratory tract. It also appears in portions of the male reproductive system, such as the epididymis and vas deferens, where it may carry stereocilia, non-motile, actin-based projections distinct from true cilia. In the trachea, the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium forms the innermost lining. Its apical surface bristles with motile cilia, microtubule-based extensions arranged in a 9+2 structure, powered by dynein motors. These cilia beat in a coordinated metachronal wave toward the pharynx. Beneath them lies a thin film of watery mucus, topped by a more viscous gel. Together they trap particulates and pathogens. The cilia do not push debris directly, they move the overlying mucus blanket, clearing airways without abrasion. When viewed in motion, the surface ripples like wind across grass. Goblet cells, modified columnar cells with apical mucin granules, are scattered among the ciliated cells. They secrete mucins, especially MuC5AC and MuC5B, which hydrate and polymerize into the gel layer. The mucus traps inhaled dust, microbes, and allergens. Its composition adjusts to hydration status, irritants, and inflammation. Too thick and clearance stalls, too thin and protection wanes. Goblet cell density can increase with chronic exposure, such as in smokers or patients with asthma or chronic bronchitis. Basal cells, small and located near the basement membrane, serve as progenitors. Though they don't reach the lumen, they anchor the structure and replace lost or damaged ciliated and goblet cells. Intermediate cells, which may be differentiating forms, round out the population. In electron microscopy, specialized junctions, tight junctions, adherence junctions, desmosomes bind the cells into a coordinated sheet. Gap junctions allow ions and small molecules to synchronize function, supporting unified ciliary beat. The basement membrane beneath is often thickened in chronic airway diseases. Though the term membrane implies delicacy, this matrix can become dense with collagen and proteoglycans, especially under chronic stress, as seen in asthma or long-standing bronchitis. The subepithelial layer may also show increased fibroblasts, inflammatory cells, and vascularity, histologic signs of remodeling. Ciliary motion depends on energy and structure. ATP fuels dynein arms that cause adjacent microtubule doublets to slide, bending the cilium. Radial spokes and necks and links convert sliding into coordinated motion. Defects in any of these components, as seen in primary ciliary dyskinesia (PCD), impair clearance. In PCD, patients suffer recurrent infections, bronchiectasis, and may develop situs inversus due to embryologic rolls of nodal cilia. Cartilage syndrome, a triad of chronic sinusitis, bronchiectasis, and situs inversus, is a classic example. Diagnosis may include biopsy with electron microscopy or genetic testing. Recognition is key. Early management improves quality of life and reduces complications. In the male reproductive tract, pseudostratified columnar epithelium lines the epididymis and vas deferens. Here, the apical projections are stereocilia, not true cilia, but long, non-motile, actin-based structures that increase surface area for absorption and secretion. These cells help concentrate sperm, modify luminal content, and support maturation. Despite their name, stereocilia are more like very long microvilli and do not beat or move material. They anchor to the terminal web and respond to hormonal cues. Pseudostratified epithelia are not uniform. In smokers or those with chronic irritation, ciliated cells may be replaced by squamous cells, a metaplastic change that resists abrasion but compromises clearance. The mucus continues, but the escalator stalls. Debris accumulates, infections grow, and inflammation deepens. Metaplasia is reversible early but may progress to dysplasia and neoplasia with ongoing stress. When seen in cytologic specimens or biopsies, this change signals a site under threat. Repair in pseudostratified epithelium follows a hierarchical pattern. Basal cells proliferate and differentiate upward. Damaged ciliated cells are shed and replaced. Goblet cells can reappear in altered ratios. Cytokines, matrix composition, and mechanical cues guide this regeneration. However, repeated injury may lead to incomplete repair, fibrosis, or architectural disorganization. The tight choreography of clearance depends on intact cell types, alignment, and matrix. Consider a patient with chronic rhinosinusitis, nasal congestion, postnasal drip, and recurrent infections. Biopsy of the nasal mucosa may show loss of cilia, increased goblet cells, and epithelial remodeling. These findings explain symptoms: mucus thickens and pools, ciliary movement is impaired, and local immunity becomes overwhelmed. Treatment may include hydration, nasal irrigation, anti-inflammatories, or surgical correction, but persistent symptoms should prompt professional evaluation, as structural or systemic contributors must be ruled out. In another case, a child with frequent chest infections and no known allergies may warrant investigation for ciliary dysfunction. Persistent wet cough, year-round rhinitis, and otitis media raise suspicion. If PCD is diagnosed early, airway clearance therapies and monitoring reduce complications and improve lung growth. Crowded isn't chaotic. In pseudostratified epithelia, every cell plays a role: movers, makers, renewers, tied to a single foundation. What looks like layers is really a vertical division of labor. tuned to keep the airway clear without drawing attention. Now, the scene shifts. What if the job is to endure friction, chemical assault, or microbial threat, not to move or absorb, but to resist? When layers thicken and cells sacrifice themselves, what barrier emerges? You run your finger gently along your inner cheek, then across the back of your hand. Both feel smooth, but the difference is more than surface. One is moist and flexible, the other dry, armored. Both are protected by stratified squamous epithelium, multiple layers of cells designed not to transport or secrete, but to resist. This is the body's answer to abrasion, pathogens, and exposure, a layered, self-renewing wall. Stratified means more than one layer of cells. Only the basal layer touches the basement membrane, the rest stack upward toward the surface. Squamous refers to the flat shape of cells in the outermost apical layer. The naming convention follows the apical layer's shape, not the basal. Cells at the base are often cuboidal or even columnar, but as they divide and move upward, they flatten, lose organelles, and eventually die, forming a barrier ready to be shed. Stratified squamous epithelium comes in two main forms, keratinized and non-keratinized. Keratinized epithelium, such as the epidermis of skin, has a surface layer of dead cells filled with keratin, a tough, water-resistant protein. These cells lack nuclei and organelles, forming the stratum corneum. Non-keratinized epithelium found in the oral cavity, esophagus, vagina, and anal canal retains nuclei in the apical layers and remains moist. It sacrifices some resistance to dryness in favor of pliability and permeability. Start with keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, the skin. The epidermis is organized into layers: basal stratum basale, prickle stratum spinosum, granular stratum granulosum, and cornified. Basal cells divide and push daughters upward. As cells ascend, they accumulate keratohyaline granules, profilagrin, lorocrine, and volucrine, which promote cross-linking and keratin filament bundling. They also produce lipids that, when exocytosed, form an intercellular lipid envelope, reinforcing the barrier. In the upper layers, nuclei and organelles are lost. Keratin fills the cytoplasm. These dead cells form a dense, insoluble barrier that resists water loss, microbial invasion, and mechanical damage. Melanocytes and Langerhans cells reside in the basal and suprabasal layers. Melanocytes transfer melanin granules to keratinocytes, protecting nuclear DNA from ultraviolet light. Langerhans cells survey for pathogens, processing and presenting antigens to the immune system. The basement membrane anchors the epidermis to the dermis. When disrupted, as in burns or autoimmune conditions, blistering and fluid loss may follow. Now consider non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. It lines the oral cavity, esophagus, true vocal cords, vagina, and distal anal canal, places where friction is common but constant dryness is not. Here apical cells retain nuclei and some organelles, allowing rapid repair and a moist surface. The structure remains layered. Basal cells divide, intermediate cells differentiate, apical cells flatten, tight junctions and desmosomes bind the layers. The basement membrane anchors the sheet. Lubrication comes from glandular secretions, salivary glands in the mouth, cervical and vestibular glands in the vagina, rather than from a keratinized surface. Desmosomes play a central role. These spot-like adhesions use cadherins, desmogleins, desmocollins linked to intermediate filaments, keratins, via placoglobin and desmoplakin. Together they form a mechanical mesh across cells, distributing stress and preserving cohesion. In light microscopy, this appears as intercellular bridges, the spiny appearance of the stratum spinosum. Loss of desmosomes, as in pemphigus vulgaris, causes intraepithelial splits, the skin or mucosa blisters and sloughs. In contrast, bullous pemphigoid targets hemidesmosomes, anchoring the basal layer to the basement membrane, leading to subepidermal blisters. Renewal in stratified squamous epithelium is constant. Basal stem cells divide and their daughters move upward, differentiating as they go. The journey takes days to weeks depending on location and turnover rate. Apoptosis and desquamation complete the cycle. This dynamic balance allows healing from minor injuries without scarring, provided the basement membrane remains intact. When deeper layers are breached, repair involves inflammation, fibroblast activity, and sometimes fibrosis. Adaptation occurs readily. Chronic irritation, acid reflux in the esophagus, tobacco in the mouth, or infection in the cervix can induce metaplasia. In Barrett's esophagus, for example, the distal esophageal squamous epithelium is replaced by columnar epithelium with goblet cells, adapting to acid but increasing cancer risk. In the cervix, squamocolumnar junctions shift with hormonal changes and age. Persistent HPV infection can lead to dysplasia, detected by pap smears. Early recognition allows safe monitoring or treatment. Histologic clues help differentiate keratinized from non-keratinized epithelium. In keratinized types, the apical layer lacks nuclei, the stratum corneum appears dense, eosinophilic, and anuclear. In non-keratinized types, surface cells retain nuclei and appear lighter. Keratinized epithelium often has a granular layer. Non-keratinized lacks this. These distinctions matter in biopsies, identifying site origin, adaptive changes, or early neoplasia. Consider a patient with a persistent sore throat. Examination shows erythema and ulceration in the oropharynx. Biopsy reveals stratified squamous epithelium with reactive basal hyperplasia, spongiosis, intercellular edema, and inflammatory infiltrates. If the surface cells retain nuclei, the site is non-keratinized mucosa. If the ulcer deepens, exposing connective tissue and blood vessels, pain intensifies. When symptoms persist, especially with weight loss, difficulty swallowing, or voice changes, professional evaluation becomes critical to exclude malignancy or systemic causes. In another scenario, a person develops a thickened, scaly lesion on sun-exposed skin. Biopsy shows hyperkeratosis, parakeratosis, retained nuclei in the cornified layer, and atypical basal cells, findings consistent with actinic keratosis. This lesion arises from keratinized epithelium altered by ultraviolet radiation. Without intervention, it may progress to squamous cell carcinoma. Recognizing early architectural changes allows for safe and timely care. Resistance has a rhythm. In stratified squamous epithelium, cells climb, flatten, die, and fall, each layer a chapter in a quiet story of defense. You are not seeing a wall but a waterfall flowing upward until sacrifice becomes shield. From thick layers that defend comes a different need: flexibility. How can an epithelium stretch without tearing, return to shape, and hold fluid under pressure? What makes it both dome-shaped and dynamic? You look into the lumen of the bladder and see cells that defy a single description. Some look round and dome-like, others appear flattened, and the number of layers seems to shift depending on the state of distension. This is transitional epithelium, also known as urothelium, a multi-layered stretchable lining found exclusively in the urinary tract. Its unique architecture enables distension, impermeability, and repair in a high-pressure, chemically aggressive environment. Transitional epithelium lines the renal pelvis, ureters, urinary bladder, and proximal urethra regions, where urine passes or pools. Its defining features include multiple layers of cells, dome-shaped superficial cells when relaxed, and the ability to flatten and expand when stretched. Despite apparent complexity, it functions as a single cohesive unit, with specialized junctions and membrane dynamics that preserve barrier integrity even under mechanical strain. Start with its organization. The basal layer rests on a basement membrane and contains small, roughly cuboidal or columnar cells. These are mitotically active, anchoring the tissue and supplying new cells. The intermediate layers, more polyhedral in shape, serve as buffers. They shift and slide over one another during distension. At the surface, the hallmark is the umbrella cell, a large dome-shaped cell that can span multiple underlying cells. Umbrella cells are often binucleated and show unique adaptations for their demanding role. The key to their function lies in the apical membrane. Umbrella cells have a highly specialized surface called the asymmetric unit membrane, AUM, composed of hexagonally packed plaques made of uroplakins. These plaques create stiff, impermeable domains that alternate with hinge regions, flexible areas that allow the membrane to fold and unfold. During bladder filling, cytoplasmic vesicles containing reserve AUM fuse with the surface, increasing membrane area without tearing. Upon voiding, the excess membrane is endocytosed and stored. This dynamic surface remodeling prevents leakage and maintains tension-free expansion. Beneath the apical surface, tight junctions seal the paracellular space, preserving barrier function even during stretch. These junctions include claudians, occludian, and zonula occludiens proteins, similar to other epithelia but adapted for higher strain. Adherence junctions and desmos provide lateral cohesion, while integrins and the basal cells anchor to the underlying matrix. Together, these components allow the urothelium to stretch and recoil thousands of times over a lifetime without losing integrity. Histologically, the epithelium appears thick and multi-layered when relaxed, and thinner with flatter cells when distended. In fixed tissue, dome-shaped umbrella cells are a key clue. When the bladder is full, the apical cells appear squamous, misleading unless one recalls the dynamic nature of this lining. Unlike truly stratified squamous epithelium, transitional epithelium retains rounder nuclei near the surface and exhibits less flattening overall. Functionally, the urothelium must block reabsorption of urinary solutes and withstand toxicity. Urine contains urea, ammonium, and other solutes at concentrations that would disrupt homeostasis if absorbed. Uroplakins and tight junctions prevent this leakage. Additionally, umbrella cells express glycosaminoglycan GAG layers on their luminal surface, forming a hydrophilic protective coat that resists bacterial adhesion and chemical injury. Yet, like all epithelia, this lining is vulnerable under stress. Recurrent infections, bladder outlet obstruction, radiation, or toxins can disrupt the surface and expose underlying layers. Injury triggers a repair cascade. Umbrella cells flatten and migrate to cover defects, basal cells proliferate, matrix components remodel. The urothelium typically regenerates well if the basement membrane remains intact, but chronic damage may induce metaplasia, dysplasia, or carcinoma. A unique challenge arises in urinary tract infections, UTIs. Uropathogenic Escherichia coli (EPEC) can adhere to umbrella cells via fimbria, invade, and form intracellular bacterial communities. This intracellular niche allows persistence and recurrence despite apparent clearance. The GAG layer, antimicrobial peptides, and exfoliation of infected cells provide defenses, but when overwhelmed, symptoms return. In recurrent cases, further evaluation is warranted to rule out structural or functional contributors. Another clinical condition linked to the urothelium is interstitial cystitis, IC, also known as bladder pain syndrome. Patients experience urinary frequency, urgency, and pelvic pain without obvious infection. Biopsies may show denuded epithelium, mast cell infiltration, or fibrin deposition beneath the urothelium. The cause remains uncertain, but defects in the barrier, whether in the GAG layer or tight junctions, appear central. Treatments aim to restore the lining's integrity or modulate nerve signaling. If you experience persistent bladder discomfort, urgency, or burning without infection, medical evaluation is essential to determine safe next steps. In rare cases, metaplastic transformation leads to squamous or glandular differentiation. In chronic irritation, especially with catheter use or schistosomiasis in endemic regions, keratinizing squamous metaplasia can develop, increasing cancer risk. Urothelial carcinoma, the most common bladder cancer, arises from the transitional epithelium and often retains some of its architectural features. Grading and staging depend on nuclear atypia, invasion depth, and architectural distortion, not just cell origin. Flexibility without rupture is mastery. Transitional epithelium does not choose between thickness and stretch. It merges both, protecting against pressure and chemistry by reshaping in silence. From a shifting, stretching barrier, your attention moves to the naming of names. How are epithelial types classified with precision? What rules determine when a flat cell becomes squamous or a surface earns the label ciliated? You sit with a labeled slide, trying to decode the tissue before you. The cells form a sheet, but are they flat or tall, one layer or more, with cilia or not? You've seen the pieces before, squamous, cuboidal, columnar, simple, stratified, but now the classification must be deliberate. Histologic language must be precise because diagnosis, treatment, and understanding hinge on that structure-function correspondence. Epithelia are classified by 3 core criteria: number of layers, shape of the apical cells, and surface specializations. The system is descriptive but functional. Each element of the name tells you something about what the tissue does, how it behaves, and what pressures it resists or supports. Start with layering. If all cells touch the basement membrane, the epithelium is simple. If only the bottom layer does and the rest stack above, it is stratified. Pseudostratified epithelium appears layered but is truly simple. Every cell contacts the base, though not all reach the lumen. Transitional epithelium is considered stratified by structure but is classified separately due to its unique function and dynamic form. Next, the shape of apical cells. Squamous describes flat, plate-like cells with flattened nuclei. These favor diffusion and surface protection. Cuboidal indicates roughly equal height and width, with round central nuclei, ideal for absorption and secretion. Columnar refers to tall cells with basally located nuclei, often aligned neatly, suitable for polarized transport and specialized secretion. The naming always follows the apical surface. Basal cells may be cuboidal or columnar even in squamous epithelium, but the classification does not reflect their shape. Combine these two axes and you have the foundational set. Simple squamous epithelium, single layer of flat cells, seen in alveoli, capillaries, mesothelium. Simple cuboidal epithelium, single layer of cube-shaped cells, lined small ducts, kidney tubules, thyroid follicles. Simple columnar epithelium, single layer of tall cells, lined stomach, intestines, uterus. Stratified squamous epithelium, multiple layers, with flat apical cells seen in skin, esophagus, vagina. Stratified cuboidal columnar epithelium, rare, found in large ducts of glands, male urethra. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium, single layer with nuclei at varying heights, often ciliated in respiratory tract. Transitional epithelium, stratified, with dome-shaped apical cells that flatten when stretched, in urinary system. Surface specializations refine this naming. The presence of cilia motile, microtubule-based extensions, qualifies the tissue as ciliated. Thus, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium lines the trachea and bronchi. If microvilli dominate, as in the small intestine, the term brush border may appear, though it is not part of the formal classification. Keratinization also modifies the name. Stratified squamous keratinized epithelium covers the skin. The non-keratinized variant lines moist surfaces like the esophagus and vagina. These distinctions are not merely academic. They influence fluid movement, pathogen defense, injury response, and signal transmission. For example, ciliated pseudostratified epithelium clears mucus. Its loss leads to infections. Keratinized squamous epithelium prevents water loss and resists friction. Non-keratinized types offer flexibility at the cost of resilience. Cuboidal and columnar epithelia can transport against gradients. Squamous epithelia rarely do. Classification also helps track developmental or pathological transitions. In metaplasia, one epithelium converts to another, better suited for chronic stress. Barrett's esophagus, for instance, features columnar epithelium with goblet cells replacing the normal stratified squamous lining in response to acid reflux. In the cervix, the transformation zone where columnar endocervical epithelium meets stratified squamous ectocervical epithelium is a dynamic region prone to metaplasia and occasionally dysplasia, an early neoplastic change. Accurate naming helps pathologists detect and interpret such changes. Stains aid classification. Hematoxylin and eosin provide basic contrast, nuclei blue, cytoplasm pink, but special stains or immunohistochemistry reveal functional markers. Cilia may be confirmed by antibodies against tubulin, microvilli by actin-binding proteins, basement membranes by collagen IV or laminin, junctions by Z01, E-cadherin or desmoplakin. In difficult cases, damaged tissue, unclear architecture, or atypical differentiation, these tools clarify classification. Artifacts can mislead. Compression during sectioning may flatten columnar cells. Oblique cuts can turn a simple epithelium into an apparent stratified one. Loss of nuclei in upper layers may simulate keratinization. Swelling from fixation can distort cytoplasm. A trained eye cross-references architecture, nuclear shape, cytoplasmic tone, and staining pattern before naming a type. In practice, naming often requires clinical context. A biopsy from the trachea should yield pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. If it shows stratified squamous instead, metaplasia is likely. A ureter should have transitional epithelium. If replaced by squamous cells, chronic irritation or neoplasia may be at play. Classification is not a static label, it is a window into past signals, present stress, and future behavior. Consider a biopsy from a bladder mass. If the pathologist identifies transitional epithelium with architectural disarray, nuclear atypia, and invasion beyond the basement membrane, the diagnosis may be high-grade urothelial carcinoma. The naming rooted in epithelial classification drives treatment decisions from surveillance to surgery to systemic therapy. Misclassification risks mismanagement. In another setting, a patient with dry, scaly skin has a biopsy showing thickened stratified squamous keratinized epithelium with parakeratosis, retained nuclei in the stratum corneum. This pattern, seen in conditions like psoriasis, explains scaling and guides therapy toward anti-inflammatory or immunomodulating agents. The histologic label leads to safe, targeted care. Names are maps. When you classify epithelium precisely, you don't just describe it, you explain its history and forecast its future. Each term holds information shaped by form, function, and force. From sheets and labels, your attention now turns to secretions. What happens when an epithelium folds inward, specializes, and transforms into a gland? How does form concentrate and direct flow? You look beyond a flat sheet and notice an invagination, a downfolding of epithelium into the connective tissue below. Here, the surface stops being a barrier and becomes a factory. This is glandular epithelium, where cells specialize in producing, modifying, and releasing substances into ducts or directly into the blood. Glands are not random clusters of secretory cells. They are organized engines, built by invagination, sustained by polarity, and shaped by the chemistry of their products. Glands fall into two broad categories: exocrine, which secrete onto surfaces via ducts, and endocrine, which release hormones into interstitial fluid and then into the bloodstream. Some glands have both functions, like the pancreas, which secretes digestive enzymes through ducts and insulin directly into the blood. The distinction is not just anatomical, it reflects fundamental differences in organization, signaling, and systemic impact. Exocrine glands develop when epithelial sheets fold downward and maintain a connection to the surface. The secretory portion produces the product, the duct conveys it. Depending on complexity, glands may be simple, unbranched ducts, or compound, branched ducts. Their secretory units may be tubular, acinar, alveolar, or tubulo-acinar. These shapes matter. Tubular glands often line intestinal walls and produce mucus. Acinar glands, like in the pancreas, or salivary glands, secrete enzymes or watery fluids. The method of secretion also varies. In murocrine secretion, products are released via exocytosis. Vesicles fuse with the membrane and release contents without damaging the cell. This is the most common mode, seen in sweat glands, salivary glands, and pancreatic acini. Abrasion secretion involves the loss of apical cytoplasm along with the product. Mammary glands exemplify this. Holocrine secretion requires the entire cell to disintegrate, releasing its contents as in sebaceous glands of the skin. Each method balances energy cost, product type, and turnover rate. The composition of secretions further categorizes exocrine glands into serous, mucus, or mixed. Serous cells produce watery, enzyme-rich secretions. They appear dark and granular under H&E due to abundant rough endoplasmic reticulum and apical zymogen granules. Mucus cells secrete glycoproteins that hydrate to form mucus. They appear pale due to mucin vacuoles and displaced nuclei. Mixed glands such as submandibular salivary glands contain both cell types. Serous demyelinations may cap mucus tubules and paraffin-embedded sections, though this may be an artifact of fixation. Now contrast with endocrine glands, which lose their duct connection during development and release hormones directly into the extracellular space. From there, hormones diffuse into nearby capillaries and circulate systemically. Endocrine cells cluster around fenestrated capillaries and often exhibit cords, follicles, or islets of cells. Examples include the thyroid gland, which stores hormone precursors in follicles, the adrenal cortex, which secretes steroids from radial cords, and the pancreatic islets, which release insulin and glucagon from dispersed clusters. Endocrine secretion is tightly regulated. Cells sense chemical signals, glucose, calcium, trophic hormones, and respond with precise secretion. This requires extensive endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, and vesicle machinery. In peptide-secreting cells, granules accumulate and release upon stimulation. In steroid-secreting cells, smooth ER and lipid droplets dominate, reflecting the lipid-soluble nature of their products. Paracrine and autocrine signaling further blur lines. Some epithelial cells secrete molecules that affect nearby cells, paracrine, or themselves, autocrine, without entering systemic circulation. For example, enteroendocrine cells in the gut release hormones that act locally to modulate motility or secretion. These cells often appear scattered within simple columnar epithelium and are identifiable by immunohistochemistry. The basement membrane remains essential even in glands. It separates glandular epithelium from surrounding stroma, directs polarity, and filters signaling molecules. In both exocrine and endocrine glands, epithelial cells rest on this membrane, maintaining organized orientation of nuclei basally and secretory machinery apically. Myoepithelial cells found in some exocrine glands, e.g. salivary, sweat, mammary, sit between the secretory epithelium and basement membrane. These contractile cells aid in expelling glandular secretions. They express smooth muscle actin and cytokeratins and form a delicate spider-like network under the epithelium. When stimulated by autonomic input or hormonal cues, they contract and squeeze secretory units, enhancing flow. In pathology, glandular structure and behavior help identify neoplasms. Adenomas and adenocarcinomas arise from glandular epithelium and may retain acinar or ductal patterns. Loss of polarity, irregular gland formation, nuclear atypia, and invasion beyond the basement membrane are clues to malignancy. Special stains such as muthicarmine or PAS for mucins or immunostains for cytokeratins assist in classification. Consider a patient with a parotid mass. Histology reveals both mucus and serous components arranged in tubuloacinar structures, with ducts retaining normal polarity. This suggests a benign mixed tumor, pleomorphic adenoma. If instead the architecture is disrupted, with crowded nuclei and cribriform patterns, the diagnosis may shift to mucoepidermoid carcinoma. The structural organization ducts, acini myoepithelial layers, is not just anatomic, it defines behavior. In another scenario, a patient has signs of thyroid dysfunction. Biopsy reveals thyroid follicles lined by simple cuboidal epithelium, filled with eosinophilic colloid, thyroglobulin. If cells are tall, columnar, and vacuolated, the gland is hyperactive. If flattened, hypofunction is likely. The presence or absence of lymphoid infiltrates, papillary architecture, or nuclear changes informs diagnosis from autoimmune thyroiditis to papillary carcinoma. Each pattern is rooted in glandular epithelial behavior. A gland is a folded intention. What began as a flat barrier now concentrates purpose, absorbing, modifying, and secreting with microscopic accuracy. Understanding its shape and flow turns secretion from mystery into map. From folded factories, we turn to the space between. What about the tissues that surround and support epithelium? The scaffolds of collagen, the highways of interstitial fluid. How does the connective matrix shape every surface you've seen? You now step beneath the epithelial sheet into the connective tissue that supports, nourishes, and shapes it. Unlike epithelia, where cells are tightly packed, connective tissue features cells scattered within an abundant extracellular matrix. This matrix is not filler, it is a dynamic, responsive scaffold that transmits force, stores energy, directs cell behavior, and enables healing. Understanding its elements unlocks the function of nearly every organ and structure you've seen so far. Connective tissue proper includes several subtypes: loose connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue, dense regular connective tissue, and adipose tissue. All are derived from embryonic mesenchyme, a loosely organized, undifferentiated tissue of mesodermal origin. Despite their diversity, these tissues share a core principle. They contain relatively few cells surrounded by a complex extracellular matrix composed of fibers and ground substance. Start with the cellular components. The principal cell of most connective tissue proper is the fibroblast, an elongated or stellate cell that synthesizes collagen, elastin, and other matrix components. When quiescent, it is called a fibrocyte. When active, it enlarges with abundant rough endoplasmic reticulum and a prominent Golgi apparatus. Fibroblasts not only produce matrix but also remodel it by secreting matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs, and their inhibitors. Adipocytes, or fat cells, are specialized for lipid storage. In white adipose tissue, each adipocyte stores a single large lipid droplet, unilocular, pushing the nucleus to the periphery. These cells serve as energy reservoirs, insulators, and endocrine organs, secreting adipokines like leptin and adiponectin. In brown adipose tissue, more common in infants, adipocytes contain multiple small droplets, multilocular, and abundant mitochondria, enabling heat generation via uncoupled respiration. Immune cells also reside in connective tissue. Macrophages derived from monocytes, phagocytosous pathogens and debris, present antigens and secrete cytokines. They appear as large irregular cells with a foamy cytoplasm. Mast cells with basophilic granules release histamine and heparin during allergic and inflammatory responses, promoting vascular permeability. Plasma cells differentiated from B lymphocytes produce antibodies and are identifiable by their eccentric nucleus, perinuclear Hoof-Golgi zone, and clock-face chromatin. Leukocytes, especially lymphocytes and eosinophils, traffic through connective tissues in response to infection and injury. Now the extracellular matrix. This is the true engine of connective tissue function. It consists of fibers and ground substance. Collagen fibers provide tensile strength. Type 1 collagen is the most abundant, thick, eosinophilic, and found in tendons, dermis, and capsules. Type 2 predominates in cartilage. Type 3 reticulin forms delicate branching networks in lymphoid organs and basement membranes. Type 4 is non-fibrillar, found in basement membranes. Collagen synthesis involves intracellular formation of procollagen, triple helices, and extracellular processing to form insoluble fibrils and fibers. Defects in synthesis cause conditions like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with hyperextensible skin and joint laxity. Elastic fibers provide resilience, allowing tissues to stretch and recoil. They are composed of elastin, a hydrophobic protein, surrounded by a sheath of fibrillin microfibrils. Elastic fibers are prominent in large arteries, e.g. aorta, lungs, and skin. They appear thinner and less eosinophilic than collagen and require special stains, e.g. for Hoff-von or Orsine for clear visualization. Defects in fibrillin, as in Marfan syndrome, weaken the aortic wall and lens ligaments. Reticular fibers made of type 3 collagen form fine branching networks that support soft tissues like liver, spleen, and lymph nodes. They are not visible with H&E, but stain black with silver, argyrophilic. Their delicate scaffolding maintains structure while permitting cell movement. Ground substance fills the space between fibers and cells. It consists of water, glycosaminoglycans, GAGs, proteoglycans, and glycoproteins. GAGs, like hyaluronic acid, attract water, forming a gel that resists compression and facilitates diffusion. Proteoglycans, GAGs, attached to a core protein, form aggregates that bind cytokines and growth factors. Glycoproteins like fibronectin and laminin link cells to the matrix and guide migration. The matrix is not passive. It binds water, ions, and signaling molecules. It transmits mechanical forces, such as tension or shear, to embedded cells via integrins, transmembrane receptors that link extracellular ligands to the actin cytoskeleton. This mechanotransduction alters gene expression, cell behavior, and matrix remodeling. The stiffness of the matrix can influence stem cell fate. Softer matrices promote neural differentiation, stiffer ones muscle or bone. Now the connective tissue types. Loose areolar connective tissue has few fibers, abundant ground substance, and many cells. It lies beneath most epithelial membranes, in lamina propria and around blood vessels. It allows diffusion, immune surveillance, and rapid response to injury. It is flexible, not strong. Dense irregular connective tissue has abundant collagen bundles arranged in various directions. It provides strength in multiple axes and forms the dermis, organ capsules, and submucosa. The nuclei of fibroblasts appear scattered, the matrix dense but disorganized. Dense regular connective tissue has collagen fibers aligned in parallel, maximizing tensile strength in one direction. It forms tendons, muscle to bone, ligaments, bone to bone, and aponeuroses. Fibroblast nuclei align between fiber bundles, forming a tidy, linear pattern. Adipose tissue exists in two main forms. White fat is the dominant energy store, appearing as large, pale, round cells with peripheral nuclei. Brown fat, less common in adults, contains smaller, multilocular cells with dense mitochondria. Histologically, fat cells appear as empty rings due to lipid loss during processing. Connective tissue also contains vessels, nerves, and lymphatics. Capillaries pass nutrients to overlying epithelia, arterioles modulate flow, venules mediate inflammation, nerves transmit sensation or regulate blood flow via autonomic fibers. Lymphatics remove excess interstitial fluid and transport immune cells. These components interact dynamically with the matrix and resident cells. Consider wound healing. A cut disrupts the epithelium and underlying connective tissue. Clotting halts bleeding. Platelets and damaged cells release growth factors. Neutrophils and macrophages clear debris. Fibroblasts proliferate and deposit new matrix, first collagen type 3, then type 1. Capillaries grow into the granulation tissue. Over weeks, matrix matures, fibroblasts contract, and scars form. The quality of healing depends on matrix composition, vascular supply, and cellular orchestration. Or imagine a patient with skin fragility and joint hypermobility. Biopsy shows sparse, disorganized collagen and widened spaces. Molecular testing reveals a mutation in a collagen gene consistent with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Understanding the matrix explains not only appearance but function and risk. The space between is alive. Connective tissue is not background, it is the platform, the conduit, the guide. When you see open space, ask what it contains, what it allows, and what it holds in place. From flexible scaffolds and fluid highways, the map shifts toward specialized structure. What if the matrix becomes firm, smooth, and resilient, absorbing shock without cracking? In cartilage, how do cells and fibers merge flexibility with form? You feel the ground under your fingertips, not hard like bone nor soft like muscle, but springy, smooth, resilient. This is cartilage, a specialized form of connective tissue that bends without breaking, compresses without collapsing. Cartilage balances structure and flexibility, forming the skeleton of embryos, shaping the nose and ear and lining joints with low-friction surfaces. Despite its strength, it lacks blood vessels, making it uniquely avascular among connective tissues. This duality, durable yet dependent, is central to its function. Cartilage is composed of chondrocytes, which reside in lacunae, small cavities within the extracellular matrix, and of the matrix itself, which is rich in collagen, elastin, and proteoglycans. All cartilage types derive from chondroblasts, immature cells that secrete matrix. Once enclosed in the matrix, chondroblasts mature into chondrocytes. These cells maintain the matrix and respond to mechanical and chemical stimuli, but their activity is limited due to poor nutrient diffusion in the dense avascular environment. The matrix is firm but not mineralized. It contains abundant type 2 collagen, invisible under light microscopy, and proteoglycans, which bind water and resist compression. Aggrecan, the major proteoglycan, contains glycosaminoglycans, GAGs like chondroitin sulfate and keratin sulfate, which form large aggregates with hyaluronic acid. These aggregates create a gel-like consistency, enabling cartilage to absorb shock, resist deformation, and return to shape. Cartilage is usually surrounded by a perichondrium, a dense connective tissue sheath that contains blood vessels and progenitor cells. The perichondrium supports growth and repair via two mechanisms: appositional growth, where new cartilage forms at the surface from perichondrial cells, and interstitial growth, where chondrocytes within lacunae divide and secrete new matrix. Only certain cartilage types retain both growth modes after development. 3 types of cartilage dominate the body: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Each has a distinct composition and function, suited to its location and mechanical role. Hyaline cartilage is the most common form. Its name from the Greek hylos means glassy, reflecting its smooth, homogeneous appearance under the microscope. Hyaline cartilage forms the fetal skeleton, epiphyseal plates of growing bones, costal cartilages, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and the articular surfaces of synovial joints. In joints, it provides a low-friction, load-distributing surface that minimizes wear. In airways, it maintains patency and structure. Microscopically, hyaline cartilage shows clusters of chondrocytes and lacunae arranged singly or in isogynous groups, clones formed by mitotic division. The matrix stains pale basophilic due to the high content of sulfated GAGs. A perichondrium typically surrounds the tissue, except at articular surfaces. Since hyaline cartilage lacks blood vessels, nutrients diffuse from the perichondrium or synovial fluid, limiting regenerative capacity. Elastic cartilage combines the glassy base of hyaline with a dense network of elastic fibers, giving it flexibility and recoil. It is found in the external ear epiglottis and auditory eustachian tube. Elastic cartilage stains more darkly and irregularly than hyaline, and elastic fibers are best visualized with special stains such as Verhoef or Orsine. The chondrocytes are larger and more closely packed, and a perichondrium is always present. This tissue bends and returns, an essential feature for structures exposed to deformation, such as the pinna, which must deform without injury, and the epiglottis, which must flex during swallowing to protect the airway. Fibrocartilage is a hybrid, combining features of dense regular connective tissue and cartilage. It contains both type 1 collagen arranged in thick parallel bundles and type 2 collagen, along with a smaller amount of proteoglycan. This makes it tougher and more resistant to tensile and shear forces. Fibrocartilage is found in the intervertebral discs, pubic symphysis, and menisci of the knee. It lacks a perichondrium. Microscopically, fibrocartilage appears more fibrous, with rows of chondrocytes and lacunae aligned between collagen bundles. The matrix is more eosinophilic due to the type I collagen. It forms a compressible, shock-absorbing pad that also resists stretching, ideal for weight-bearing joints and points of stress concentration. In pathology, cartilage reveals its limits. Osteoarthritis begins with a breakdown of hyaline cartilage at articular surfaces. Chondrocytes fail to maintain the matrix, leading to softening, fibrillation, and eventual erosion. The subchondral bone becomes exposed, triggering pain and inflammation. Since articular cartilage lacks perichondrium, regeneration is poor. Treatments may relieve symptoms, but replacement with native cartilage is rarely achieved. Consider a young athlete with knee pain. MRI reveals a tear in the meniscus, a fibrocartilaginous structure. Histology confirms fibrocartilage, chondrocytes in rows between thick collagen bundles. Repair is limited to the peripheral zone, which has some vascular supply. The central zone is avascular and slow to heal. The structure itself reflects its role. Compressible, durable, but not easily replaced. Now imagine an infant with a floppy ear. Examination shows elastic cartilage underdeveloped. Though not life-threatening, this condition highlights the specificity of cartilage subtypes, how a missing fiber type alters form and function. Over time, cartilage may grow or adapt, but its regenerative capacity remains constrained by its avascularity. Cartilage is the silent support. It bends, compresses, and endures. Without it, every step would grind, every breath collapse, every spoken word fade. In the space between fluid and bone, it holds the line. From this smooth resilience, the map continues. What if the matrix becomes rigid, calcified, shaped into pillars and plates? In bone, how does tissue become both scaffold and signal, storehouse and lever? You now encounter the most rigid of connective tissues. Bone, a living composite material, where strength, structure, and metabolic activity coexist. Unlike cartilage, bone is vascularized, innervated, and highly dynamic. It supports body weight, protects organs, enables movement through articulation with muscles, and serves as a reservoir for calcium and phosphate, essential for numerous physiological processes. Bone tissue is defined by its mineralized extracellular matrix, primarily composed of hydroxyapatite crystals, calcium phosphate organized into needle-like structures embedded in a collagen-rich framework. This organization makes bone strong yet slightly flexible. The organic component, about 1/3 of bone by weight, is mostly type 1 collagen, while the mineral component accounts for the remaining 2/3, giving compressive strength and resistance to deformation. 3 main cell types govern bone behavior: osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. Each performs a specific role in bone modeling and remodeling. Osteoblasts are mononuclear cells derived from mesenchymal stem cells. They synthesize the bone matrix called osteoid, composed of collagen and ground substance. Once secreted, this matrix mineralizes. Osteoblasts are cuboidal or columnar, line the bone surface, and have abundant rough endoplasmic reticulum and a prominent Golgi, reflecting high synthetic activity. Once entrapped in the matrix, osteoblasts differentiate into osteocytes. Osteocytes reside within lacunae, connected to each other and to the bone surface by canaliqui, narrow channels containing cytoplasmic processes. These cells maintain the matrix, sense mechanical stress, and regulate calcium exchange. Though less active than osteoblasts, osteocytes are critical for long-term bone health. They respond to strain by signaling for remodeling, contributing to bone's adaptive capacity. Osteoclasts, in contrast, are large multinucleated cells derived from monocyte macrophage lineages. They resorb bone by secreting acid and proteolytic enzymes, breaking down both mineral and organic components. These cells form Halshipp's lacunae, shallow depressions on the bone surface. Their ruffled border increases surface area for secretion and absorption. Osteoclast activity is regulated by signaling molecules such as RANK-L and osteoprotogerin, reflecting bone's intimate relationship with the immune system. The extracellular matrix of bone is structured and organized. Collagen fibers align in distinct patterns, and mineral deposition follows. In compact cortical bone, matrix is organized into osteons, cylindrical units with a central Haversian canal surrounded by concentric lamella. Each canal contains blood vessels and nerves. Osteocytes sit between lamella and lacunae, connected through canaliculi. This design allows nutrient delivery and mechanical strength. In spongy trabecular bone, found at the ends of long bones and within flat bones, matrix forms a latticework of thin trabeculi. These align along stress lines and contain osteocytes but lack true osteons. Spaces between trabeculi contain marrow. Despite its porous structure, trabecular bone is highly metabolically active and contributes significantly to calcium homeostasis. Bone formation occurs by two primary processes: intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification. Intramembranous ossification forms flat bones like the skull and clavicle. Mesenchymal cells differentiate into osteoblasts directly, secreting matrix that mineralizes in place. Endochondral ossification, responsible for long bone development, involves a cartilage template that is gradually replaced by bone. In endochondral ossification, a hyaline cartilage model forms first. Chondrocytes in the center hypertrophy and calcify their matrix. Vascular invasion follows, bringing in osteoprogenitor and hematopoietic cells. Osteoblasts lay down bone on calcified cartilage remnants, creating primary ossification centers in diaphyses and secondary centers in epiphyses. Growth in length occurs at the epiphyseal plate, where chondrocytes proliferate, mature, and are replaced by bone. Closure of this plate marks the end of growth. Bone remodeling is continuous throughout life, with osteoclasts resorbing old bone and osteoblasts laying down new matrix. This process is regulated by mechanical forces, systemic hormones, e.g. parathyroid hormone, vitamin D, calcitonin, and local factors. Remodeling allows repair, adapts to stress, and maintains calcium levels. Consider a middle-aged woman presenting with frequent fractures. DEXA scanning shows decreased bone density. Histological analysis reveals thinning trabeculi and widened Haversian canals, signs of osteoporosis. Here, the balance between osteoclast and osteoblast activity has shifted, favoring resorption. Understanding the cellular mechanisms informs both diagnosis and therapy. Now envision a child with bowed legs and delayed growth. Radiographs show widened growth plates. Histology reveals poor mineralization of osteoid, with abundant uncalcified matrix consistent with rickets, often due to vitamin D deficiency. This highlights the importance of mineral availability and systemic signaling in bone health. In healing, bone behaves uniquely among connective tissues. Fracture initiates hematoma formation, followed by fibrocartilaginous callus development. Osteoblasts then form new bone, gradually remodeled into normal architecture. Unlike cartilage or tendon, bone can heal without scarring if properly aligned and vascularized. Bone is not static, it listens, responds, repairs. It is the language of movement, the ledger of forces, the vault of minerals. Under the microscope, it is both record and response, a blueprint continually revised. From this mineralized matrix, the path winds toward motion. What if a tissue contracts, shortens, and generates force? In muscle, how do filaments organize into power, and how does form match function in skeletal, cardiac, and smooth types? You now encounter the first tissue capable of generating active movement, muscle tissue. It contracts with precision, rhythm, or subtlety, depending on its type and location. Though classified as a connective tissue in some contexts, muscle is distinct in function. It transforms chemical energy into mechanical force. There are 3 types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, each with unique cellular architecture, control mechanisms, and locations. Despite differences, all muscle tissues share a fundamental property: they contract through the interaction of actin and myosin filaments. Start with skeletal muscle, the most familiar, voluntary, and forceful. These are the muscles that move bones, stabilize joints, and control posture. Under the microscope, skeletal muscle fibers are long, cylindrical, multinucleated, and show striations, alternating light and dark bands. Each muscle fiber is a single cell, formed by the fusion of many myoblasts during development, hence the multiple nuclei, typically located at the periphery of the cell. The striations arise from the organized arrangement of myofibrils, cylindrical arrays of sarcomeres, the contractile units of muscle. Each sarcomere is bounded by Z discs and contains thin actin and thick myosin filaments. During contraction, actin filaments slide over myosin filaments, shortening the sarcomere without altering the filament length. This sliding filament model underlies all striated muscle contraction. Skeletal muscle is surrounded by layers of connective tissue, endomysium around each fiber, perimysium around fascicles, and epimysium around the entire muscle. These sheaths transmit force, provide vascular and neural supply, and enable mechanical continuity. The neuromuscular junction, NMJ, where a motor neuron meets a muscle fiber, initiates contraction. Acetylcholine release depolarizes the sarcolemma, triggering calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Calcium binds to troponin, allowing actin-myosin interaction and contraction. Skeletal muscle adapts to demand. With training, fibers increase in diameter, hypertrophy by adding myofibrils. With disuse, they atrophy. Satellite cells, muscle stem cells, aid in limited repair but cannot fully restore extensive damage. Now shift to cardiac muscle, found only in the heart wall. It contracts rhythmically, involuntarily, and continuously. Like skeletal muscle, cardiac fibers are striated, but they differ in shape and structure. Cardiac muscle cells are branched, mononucleated or binucleated, and connected end-to-end by intercalated discs, specialized junctions that enable coordinated contraction. Intercalated discs contain 3 main components: desmosomes, mechanical adhesion, fascia adherens, actin anchoring, and gap junctions, electrical coupling. These allow the heart to contract as a functional syncytinum, electrically and mechanically linked. The rhythmic contraction is initiated by pacemaker cells in the sinoatrial node, propagated through the conduction system, and modulated by autonomic input. Cardiac muscle has a less extensive sarcoplasmic reticulum than skeletal muscle and relies more on extracellular calcium for contraction. Histologically, cardiac muscle is distinguished by central nuclei, branching fibers, and intercalated discs. It is rich in mitochondria, reflecting high energy demands. Unlike skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle has limited regenerative capacity. Damage from ischemia or infarction is replaced by scar tissue, impairing contractility. Imagine a patient with chest pain after a heart attack. Biopsy shows necrotic cardiac muscle replaced by fibrous tissue, collagen where contractile tissue once lay. The intercalated discs are disrupted, and no new cardiomyocytes form. The injury is permanent, reminding us of the heart's limits despite its endurance. Now consider smooth muscle found in walls of hollow organs such as the intestines, blood vessels, bladder, uterus, and airways. Smooth muscle fibers are spindle-shaped, mononucleated, and non-striated. The absence of striages does not mean absence of order. Rather, actin and myosin are arranged in dense bodies scattered throughout the cytoplasm. These serve as anchoring points for filaments, enabling contraction in multiple directions. Smooth muscle contraction is involuntary and often slow and sustained. It is regulated by autonomic nerves, hormones, and local signals such as stretch. Calcium enters from the extracellular space or is released internally, binds to calmodulin and activates myosin light chain kinase (MLCK), which enables actin-myosin interaction. Smooth muscle cells are connected by gap junctions, allowing for coordinated waves of contraction, such as peristalsis in the gastrointestinal tract or vasoconstriction in arterioles. Unlike skeletal and cardiac muscle, smooth muscle can divide and regenerate. It undergoes hyperplasia in response to chronic stress, seen for example in the uterus during pregnancy or in vessel walls during hypertension. Consider a pregnant woman in her third trimester. Her uterus, once palm-sized, has grown immensely. Histology reveals smooth muscle hypertrophy and hyperplasia, an adaptation driven by estrogen and stretch. After birth, the cells reduce in size and number, demonstrating smooth muscles plasticity. Contrast this with an asthmatic patient. Bronchial smooth muscle shows hypertrophy and hyperreactivity. Excessive contraction narrows airways, triggering wheezing and breathlessness. Therapeutic agents target these pathways to relax the muscle and restore airflow. Muscle tissues can be compared not only by morphology but by function. Skeletal muscle provides fast, voluntary movement. Cardiac muscle offers rhythmic, resistant contractions. Smooth muscle governs subtle, persistent tone. Each adapts to its role: rigid order for speed, branching networks for rhythm, and distributed density for endurance. Muscle remembers movement. In its filaments lie not just power but patterns, heartbeat, breath, motion. Even in stillness, it waits, charged with potential. From contraction to command, from fiber to firing, the path leads onward. What tissue interprets, initiates, and integrates all action? What forms the circuit from sensing to decision? The silence before a movement, the signal behind every contraction, the command within sensation, all trace back to nervous tissue. This is the body's electrical network, comprising specialized cells that generate, transmit, and interpret signals with precision measured in milliseconds. Nervous tissue integrates the environment, orchestrates internal responses, and underlies thought, emotion, and consciousness. Nervous tissue consists of two principal cell types: neurons, the excitable signal-conducting cells, and neuroglia, the supportive, regulating, and protective cells. Though neurons dominate function, glia vastly outnumber them and are essential to nervous system integrity. Start with the neuron. Each neuron is a highly polarized cell with three distinct regions: the cell body, or soma, dendrites, and an axon. The soma contains the nucleus, ribosomes, and organelles, sustaining the metabolic needs of the cell. It often appears pale under microscopy due to the nuclear substance, aggregates of rough endoplasmic reticulum. Dendrites are short, branching projections that receive synaptic inputs. They increase receptive surface area and conduct signals toward the soma. These signals are typically graded potentials, localized changes in membrane voltage. The axon, by contrast, is a single, long projection that conducts action potentials away from the soma. At its terminus, it forms axon terminals that synapse onto other neurons, muscles, or glands. The axon hillock near the base is the site of action potential initiation. Once triggered, the signal propagates unidirectionally, relying on voltage-gated ion channels. Axons may be myelinated or unmyelinated. Myelination, provided by glial cells, wraps the axon in insulating layers, increasing conduction velocity via saltatory conduction, the jumping of action potentials between nodes of Rambier. In the central nervous system (CNS), oligodendrocytes form myelin, wrapping multiple axons. In the peripheral nervous system (PNS), Schwann cells wrap a single axon segment. Neurons are classified functionally. Sensory neurons transmit signals from receptors to the CNS. Motor neurons carry instructions from the CNS to effectors. Interneurons connect neurons within the CNS. Morphologically, they may be multipolar, most common, bipolar, e.g. in the retina, or unipolar, common in sensory pathways. The synapse is where neurons communicate. It consists of a presynaptic terminal, synaptic cleft, and postsynaptic membrane. Neurotransmitters such as glutamate, GBA, dopamine, or acetylcholine are released from vesicles, cross the cleft, and bind receptors, altering membrane potential in the target cell. The nature of the postsynaptic response depends on receptor type, not neurotransmitter identity. Now turn to neuroglia, the guardians, regulators, and modulators of neural function. In the CNS, there are 4 main types. 1. Astrocytes, star-shaped cells that support neurons structurally and metabolically. They regulate ion balance, clear neurotransmitters, and maintain the blood-brain barrier by interacting with endothelial tight junctions. Their end feet surround capillaries and synapses, buffering extracellular potassium and controlling vascular permeability. 2. Oligodendrocytes, myelinating cells of the CNS. Each extends processes that wrap multiple axons, forming myelin sheaths. Damage to oligodendrocytes, as in multiple sclerosis, leads to demyelination and slowed or blocked nerve conduction. 3. Microglia, derived from monocytes, these are the resident macrophages of the CNS. They survey the environment, phagocytose debris, and respond to injury or infection. In chronic inflammation, they can contribute to neurodegeneration. 4. Ependymal cells, ciliated cuboidal or columnar cells lining the ventricles and central canal. They help circulate cerebrospinal fluid (CSF) and form the choroid plexus, which produces CSF. Their cilia create a current that moves CSF through the ventricular system. In the PNS, supporting cells include Schwann cells, as noted, which myelinate or support peripheral axons, satellite cells which surround neuron cell bodies and ganglia and regulate the microenvironment, akin to astrocytes. Histologically, nervous tissue displays a complex architecture. In the CNS, gray matter contains neuronal cell bodies, dendrites, and unmyelinated axons. White matter contains myelinated axons. Neurons appear as large cells with prominent nucleoli and surrounding glial nuclei. In peripheral nerves, longitudinal sections show wavy axons, while transverse sections reveal circular profiles surrounded by myelin rings. Clinically, the nervous system's sensitivity to injury is profound. Consider an elderly patient with progressive memory loss and disorientation. Imaging shows cortical atrophy. Histology reveals neurofibrillary tangles and amyloid plaques, hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. Neurons once lost do not regenerate. In neurodegeneration, glial scarring gliosis replaces function with structure, but not recovery. Contrast this with Guillain-Barré syndrome, where demyelination occurs in the PNS. Patients may experience ascending weakness and arflexia. Schwann cells can remyelinate axons if the damage is limited, allowing functional recovery in many cases. The capacity for regeneration differs starkly between CNS and PNS. In injury, axonal Wallerian degeneration clears distal segments. In the PNS, macrophages and Schwann cells clear debris and support regrowth. In the CNS, the environment becomes inhibitory. Astrocytic scars, lack of growth factors, and presence of myelin-associated inhibitors all impede regeneration. Thus, spinal cord injuries often lead to permanent loss of function. Nervous tissue does not simply transmit, it interprets, remembers, and transforms. It builds the bridge between body and world, silence and speech, rest and thought. From this circuit of signals, your attention turns to the unity beneath diversity. Across tissues, what principles govern their architecture, renewal, and integration? Having examined the tissues individually, now turn to the architecture that unifies them, the principles that allow distinct tissues to coexist, coordinate, and integrate within organs and systems. Despite their differences in function, each tissue adheres to structural rules that optimize performance, durability, and adaptability. These organizing principles form the foundation of functional histology, where the form of a tissue supports its specific role. The first principle is polarity, directionality within a cell or tissue. Most notably seen in epithelial tissue, polarity manifests as distinct apical, lateral, and basal surfaces. The apical surface faces the lumen or external environment. It may bear specializations such as microvilli or cilia. The lateral surfaces contact neighboring cells through tight junctions, adherence junctions, and desmosomes, forming a selective barrier. The basal surface attaches to the basement membrane, anchoring the epithelium to underlying connective tissue. Polarity supports directional function. In the intestine, nutrients are absorbed at the apical surface, processed internally, and transported across the basal surface into capillaries. Disruption of polarity, such as in epithelial cancers, leads to loss of control and invasive behavior. Second is compartmentalization, the partitioning of tissue into functional and mechanical units. In muscle, fascicles are wrapped by connective tissue sheaths, transmitting force efficiently. In organs, capsules and septa divide tissues, concentrate immune responses, or guide blood flow. At the microscopic level, membranes create distinct environments. The blood-brain barrier segregates neural tissue from systemic circulation. Basement membranes separate epithelium from stroma. Third, all tissues exhibit a balance between cellular density and extracellular matrix, ECM. Epithelial and muscle tissues are cell-rich, optimized for barrier or contractile functions. Connective and supportive tissues, such as cartilage and bone, are ECM-rich, bearing loads or transmitting mechanical force. ECM composition, fibers, ground substance, and signaling molecules, dictates tissue properties. Collagen provides strength, elastin permits stretch, proteoglycans regulate hydration and ion exchange. In tendons, tightly packed collagen I fibers align longitudinally, resisting tensile forces. In cartilage, the ECM is rich in aggrecan, attracting water for shock absorption. In bone, the ECM becomes mineralized with calcium phosphate, providing rigidity. Alterations in ECM, whether congenital, e.g. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or acquired, e.g. fibrosis, disrupt tissue function. Fourth is vascularization. Tissues differ in blood supply depending on metabolic needs. Muscle, connective tissue, and glands are well vascularized, ensuring nutrient and oxygen delivery. Cartilage and epithelium, by contrast, are avascular and rely on diffusion from adjacent tissues. The vascular pattern also defines healing potential. Richly vascularized tissues regenerate readily. Poorly perfused tissues heal slowly or incompletely. Consider a torn tendon. Despite its function, its blood supply is limited. Healing is slow, requiring surgical repair in many cases. Contrast that with skin, where epithelial proliferation and dermal angiogenesis facilitate rapid closure. Fifth is innervation. All tissues receive some form of neural input, sensory, motor, or autonomic. Sensory nerves terminate in free nerve endings, Merkel cells, or Pacinian corpuscles depending on stimulus type. Autonomic fibers regulate smooth muscle tone, glandular secretion, and vascular diameter. This neural integration is critical for homeostasis. In the gastrointestinal tract, the enteric nervous system coordinates motility, secretion, and blood flow independently of the central nervous system. Histologically, myenteric and submucosal plexuses appear as small clusters of neurons within the gut wall. They exemplify the close relationship between structure and autonomous function. Sixth is cell turnover, the rate at which cells renew. In tissues subject to environmental stress, turnover is high. For example, the intestinal epithelium renews every 3 to 5 days. In contrast, neurons are largely post-mitotic. Stem cells, often located in protected niches, drive regeneration. These include basal cells in skin, cryptostem cells in the gut, and satellite cells in muscle. Stem cells divide asymmetrically. One daughter cell retains stemness, the other differentiates. This balance maintains tissue integrity while allowing repair. Disruption of this process, excessive proliferation, failed differentiation, or exhaustion underlies conditions from cancer to degenerative disease. Consider a patient receiving chemotherapy. Rapidly dividing tissues, gut, skin, bone marrow are most affected. Histologically, crypts of the small intestine show reduced mitotic figures and epithelial thinning, explaining mucositis and malabsorption. Conversely, tissues with slow turnover like cartilage are relatively spared. Seventh is immune surveillance. Immune cells reside within or transit through all tissues. In loose connective tissue, mast cells, macrophages, and lymphocytes monitor for injury or invasion. In mucosal epithelium, intraepithelial lymphocytes respond rapidly to antigens. The lymphatic system, visible histologically as thin-walled, endothelium-lined vessels without red blood cells, transports immune cells and drains interstitial fluid. In chronic inflammation, histology reveals lymphocyte aggregates, macrophages, and fibrosis. Granulomas, organized clusters of macrophages and giant cells, form in response to persistent stimuli such as in tuberculosis. Immune activity is tightly regulated to prevent collateral damage. Failure of this balance underlies autoimmune disease. Lastly, tissues exhibit plasticity, the ability to adapt structurally to functional demands. Hypertrophy, atrophy, hyperplasia, and metaplasia are all histologically evident. In the uterus during pregnancy, smooth muscle fibers enlarge and increase in number. In chronic acid reflux, the esophageal epithelium may undergo intestinal metaplasia, a precursor to dysplasia and malignancy. Beneath complexity lies an elegant order. Tissues shaped by stress, need, and time reconfigure to preserve function, sometimes beautifully, sometimes imperfectly. Now, you've seen the blueprint, but how do these tissues assemble into a living organ? What governs their coordination, hierarchy, and resilience in complex systems? An organ is not merely a mass of tissue, it is a structured ensemble of different tissues arranged to perform specific interdependent functions. From the liver to the lung, from the skin to the stomach, organs are unified systems built from cellular mosaics. The rules of organization shared by all organs create structural hierarchy, internal compartmentalization, and dynamic function. Each organ follows the same structural triad: parenchyma, stroma, and vascular nerve supply. The parenchyma consists of the functionally specialized cells. In the kidney, these are the nephrons; in the liver, hepatocytes; in the lung, alveolar epithelium. The stroma provides the supporting framework, mainly connective tissue, housing vessels, nerves, and immune cells. The vascular and neural supply integrates the organ into systemic physiology, allowing delivery, control, and feedback. Begin with the capsule. Most solid organs are encased in a dense connective tissue layer, the capsule providing protection, shape, and anchor points for vessels and ducts. From the capsule, septa often project inward, subdividing the organ into lobes, lobules, or compartments. This internal scaffolding defines the organ's microanatomy and supports tissue integrity under mechanical or physiological stress. In the liver, the capsule is known as Glisson's capsule. Septa divide the liver into lobules, each centered around a central vein, with portal triads, branches of the portal vein, hepatic artery, and bile duct at the periphery. Hepatocytes are arranged in cords or plates, radiating outward. The spaces between contain sinusoids where blood from the portal vein and hepatic artery mix, bathing hepatocytes before draining into the central vein. This structure allows nutrient processing, detoxification, and bile production in a continuous flow. The kidney is similarly compartmentalized. The renal capsule encloses the organ. Internally, it is divided into cortex and medulla. Nephrons span both regions. Renal corpuscles reside in the cortex, while loops of Henle and collecting ducts descend into the medulla. This arrangement facilitates filtration, reabsorption, and concentration of urine. The interstitium, connective tissue between tubules, contains peritubular capillaries and fibroblasts, crucial for endocrine functions like erythropoietin secretion. In the lung, organization balances structural delicacy with functional demand. The capsule blends into the pleura, and internal divisions form lobes and segments. Airways branch hierarchically, from bronchi to bronchioles to alveolar ducts ending in alveoli. The alveolar wall or interalveolar septum contains capillaries, fibroblasts, macrophages, and the extracellular matrix needed for gas exchange. Type 1 pneumocytes form the gas-permeable surface. Type 2 pneumocytes secrete surfactant, reducing surface tension. Each organ's design reflects its dominant functions. In the pancreas, the exocrine parenchyma, acinar cells producing digestive enzymes, is arranged in grape-like clusters. These drain into a ductal system lined by cuboidal epithelium. Scattered among them are islets of Langerhans, the endocrine units, secreting insulin and glucagon into the bloodstream. This dual role, digestive and hormonal, is partitioned structurally and histologically. In the intestine, structure supports digestion, absorption, immunity, and motility. The intestinal wall has 4 distinct layers: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. The mucosa, lined by simple columnar epithelium with microvilli, contains crypts of Lieberkuhn, housing stem cells, Paneth cells, and goblet cells. The lamina propria, a loose connective tissue layer beneath the epithelium, contains immune cells and capillaries. The muscularis mucosa, a thin smooth muscle layer, allows local movement. The submucosa supports larger vessels and sometimes glands, e.g. Brunner's glands in the duodenum. The muscularis externa drives peristalsis through inner circular and outer longitudinal smooth muscle layers. Overlaying all is the serosa, a mesothelial layer providing a frictionless interface with adjacent organs. In organs like the esophagus, this outer layer is instead an adventitia, anchoring the organ to surrounding structures without a mesothelial surface. In hollow organs, such as the bladder or uterus, the wall follows a similar stratified architecture, adapting to volume changes or cyclical remodeling. The bladder's transitional epithelium stretches without breaking. The myometrium of the uterus thickens and contracts under hormonal control. In both, the connective tissue stroma integrates vascular and immune responses. The skin, the largest organ, exemplifies layered integration. Its epidermis is stratified squamous keratinized epithelium, providing a barrier. Beneath lies the dermis, rich in collagen, vessels, nerves, and appendages like hair follicles and sweat glands. The hypodermis, primarily adipose tissue, insulates and cushions. Histologically, each layer has a distinct cellular composition and ECM profile, tuned for resilience, sensation, and repair. An organ's vascular organization supports its parenchyma. Arteries enter with nerves, neurovascular bundles, branching into arterioles, capillaries, and venules. Capillaries differ by tissue, continuous, muscle, brain, fenestrated, endocrine glands, intestines, or sinusoidal, liver, spleen, bone marrow. Each permits varying degrees of exchange. Organs also host lymphatic vessels, crucial for fluid balance and immune surveillance. These are often visible histologically as thin-walled channels lacking erythrocytes found near venules. Lymphoid aggregates, such as Peyer's patches in the gut or tonsils, provide localized immune responses. Clinically, disruptions in organ architecture are diagnostic. In liver cirrhosis, normal lobular architecture is replaced by fibrous septa and regenerative nodules. In chronic pancreatitis, exocrine tissue atrophies, ducts dilate, and fibrosis increases. In chronic kidney disease, glomeruli become sclerotic, tubules atrophic, and interstitial fibrosis progresses. Each organ is a consensus, a meeting of distinct tissues acting in harmony, bounded by structure, sustained by flow, and defended by design. Next, we examine how multiple organs combine into systems, how histology expands beyond the microscope into the body's living networks. Begin with the cardiovascular system. Its primary role is distribution, transporting oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and immune cells while removing waste. The heart, arteries, capillaries, and veins form a circuit whose histological differences reflect hemodynamic demands. Each system obeys the logic of division of labor, redundancy, and specialization. Division of labor ensures that no single organ must perform all functions. Redundancy safeguards critical functions by using parallel paths or backup systems. Specialization allows efficiency but necessitates communication. When multiple organs coordinate to achieve a shared physiological purpose, they form a body system, an integrated network of structures linked anatomically, functionally, and developmentally. The study of histology within systems reveals how tissues and organs cooperate across space and time, creating continuity from cellular functions to whole body homeostasis. The heart, composed mostly of cardiac muscle, shows intercalated discs linking cardiomyocytes for synchronized contraction. The endocardium inner lining consists of simple squamous endothelium, supported by connective tissue and Purkinje fibers for conduction. The myocardium houses contractile muscle and connective stroma. The epicardium, part of the serous pericardium, is mesothelial with an underlying fat layer containing coronary vessels. Arteries exhibit three layers: tunica intima, endothelium plus subendothelial connective tissue, tunica media, smooth muscle and elastic fibers, and tunica adventitia, connective tissue, vasa vassorum. Elastic arteries like the aorta have prominent elastic lamellae in the media to buffer pressure. Muscular arteries control distribution through contractile media. Arterioles with 1 to 2 layers of smooth muscle regulate capillary flow. Capillaries, The exchange vessels vary histologically. Fenestrated capillaries, endocrine organs, kidney glomeruli have pores for rapid exchange. Continuous capillaries, muscle, brain, have uninterrupted endothelium and basal lamina. Sinusoidal capillaries, liver, bone marrow, are discontinuous, allowing passage of cells and macromolecules. The lymphatic system, often viewed as an extension, returns interstitial fluid to circulation and supports immunity. Histologically, lymphatic capillaries have thin endothelium, lack parasites, and show anchoring filaments. Lymph nodes, spleen, and thymus contain distinct architecture: cortex with follicles, medulla with sinusoids, and capsules with trabeculi. Lymphocytes migrate across these compartments, guided by chemokines and adhesion molecules. The respiratory system filters, warms, and humidifies air, conducts it to gas-exchanging surfaces, and eliminates CO2 from the nasal cavity to the alveoli. Epithelial types shift based on function. Veins have thinner walls and larger lumens than arteries. Their media is less muscular. Adventitia is prominent and often houses valves. The low-pressure venous system depends on skeletal muscle contraction and valves to maintain return flow. The alveolar wall or blood-air barrier consists of type 1 pneumocytes, thin, gas-permeable. Upper airways are lined by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells optimized for mucus clearance. The trachea and bronchi have cartilage rings, smooth muscle, and submucosal glands. As airways branch, cartilage is replaced by smooth muscle, and epithelium transitions to simple cuboidal and terminal bronchioles, then simple squamous in alveoli. Type 2 pneumocytes produce surfactant. Endothelial cells of capillaries. Interstitial matrix with fibroblasts and immune cells. This minimal barrier allows rapid diffusion of gases. Macrophages roam the alveolar lumen, clearing debris. The esophagus has non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium resisting abrasion. The stomach transitions to simple columnar epithelium, forming gastric pits and glands with mucus, parietal, and chief cells. The small intestine features villi and crypts, with absorptive enterocytes and mucus-producing goblet cells. The digestive system processes food, absorbs nutrients, and expels waste. It consists of the alimentary canal and accessory glands. Histologically, the canal has 4 layers throughout: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosus adventitia, but their composition varies. The colon lacks villi but has abundant crypts. Its mucosa is rich in goblet cells, facilitating lubrication. Beneath lies the submucosal plexus and myenteric plexus, regulating secretion and motility. Accessory organs, the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder, have specialized histoarchitecture. The liver's lobules house hepatocytes arranged in plates, bordered by sinusoids and bile canaliculi. The pancreas has acini for enzyme secretion and islets for endocrine control. The gallbladder stores bile, its mucosa lined with simple columnar epithelium forming deep folds. The renal system filters blood, balances fluids and electrolytes, and excretes wastes. The nephron, the functional unit, includes proximal tubule cuboidal with microvilli, loop of Henle, squamous and thin segments, renal corpuscle glomerulus blunt, Bowman's capsule, collecting duct, pale staining principal cells and darker intercalated cells, distal tubule cuboidal with few microvilli, the juxtaglomerular apparatus, including the macula densa and GAG cells, regulates glomerular filtration and blood pressure. The endocrine system, diffusely distributed, includes glands that secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream. Histologically, glands have no ducts and consist of cords or clusters of epithelial cells surrounded by capillaries. Examples: P. thyroid, follicles filled with colloid, lined by cuboidal epithelium. Adrenal cortex with zona glomerulosa fasciculata. Reticularis, medulla with chromaffin cells. Peripheral nerves consist of axons bundled into fascicles by perineurium, surrounded by epineurium. Each axon is encased by endoneurium. Ganglia clusters of neuron bodies are classified as sensory dorsal root, pseudo-unipolar neurons, or autonomic multipolar neurons. Pituitary, anterior acidophils, basophils, and posterior axon terminals and pituocytes. The nervous system integrates and commands. CNS tissues, brain and spinal cord have gray matter, neuronal bodies, and white matter myelinated axons. Cerebral cortex shows 6 layers. Cerebellar cortex has molecular, Purkinje, and granular layers. The spinal cord has ventral motor and dorsal sensory horns. Within and across systems, the logic of histology persists. Form aligned to function, variation tailored to role, integration ensuring survival. The immune system, overlapping all others, consists of primary lymphoid organs, bone marrow, thymus, and secondary organs, lymph nodes, spleen, MALT. Histologically, immune architecture reflects function, germinal centers for proliferation, sinusoids for filtration, reticular networks for trafficking. As we enter the final systems, we uncover the microscopic scaffolding that underpins human development, defense, and repair. Among the remaining systems, 3 exert profound control over development, regulation, and self-maintenance: the reproductive, immune, and integumentary systems. Each blends specialized histological elements with dynamic responsiveness, adapting to age, environment, and physiological demand. Their tissues reflect both complexity and renewal. Begin with the male reproductive system, whose histology reflects the dual function of goranophogenesis and hormone production. The testes are encapsulated by the tunica albuginea, a dense connective tissue sheath. Septa project inward, forming lobules, each containing seminiferous tubules where sperm are produced. The seminiferous tubules are lined by a germinal epithelium, a stratified epithelium of Sertoli cells and developing germ cells. Sertoli cells are columnar supporting cells with elongated nuclei and prominent nucleoli. They extend from the basal lamina to the lumina. Germ cells progressing from spermatogonia basal to spermatids luminal show gradual nuclear condensation and cytoplasmic remodeling. Sertoli cells form the blood-testis barrier, regulating the microenvironment. The prostate, seminal vesicles, and bulbourethral glands add secretions. The prostate is a compound tubuloalveolar gland with columnar secretory epithelium embedded in fibromuscular stroma. Histologically, it shows corpora amylacea, eosinophilic concretions within glandular lumens increasing with age. Between tubules lie interstitial, Leydig cells, large eosinophilic cells with round nuclei and abundant smooth endoplasmic reticulum, reflecting their role in testosterone synthesis. These endocrine cells support secondary sex characteristics, spermatogenesis, and systemic effects. Post-spermatogenesis, spermatozoa travel through the red intestis, lined by cuboidal epithelium, into the epididymis. Here, pseudostratified columnar epithelium with stereocilia supports maturation and storage. The smooth muscle wall thickens distally to aid propulsion. The ductus deferens, a muscular tube with a prominent thick wall, conducts sperm during ejaculation. Its epithelium is similar, and the 3 muscle layers allow peristalsis. The uterine tube has mucosal folds lined by simple columnar epithelium with ciliated and PEG cells. Cilia assist oocyte transport. PEG cells secrete nutritive fluid. The muscularis enables peristaltic movement toward the uterus. The uterus has 3 layers: endometrium, myometrium, and perimetrium. The endometrium is a dynamic mucosa with stratum functionalis shed during menstruation, and stratum basalis regenerates mucosa. Lined by simple columnar epithelium, the stroma is densely cellular with spiral arteries and uterine glands, which change with the cycle coiled and secretory in the luteal phase. In the female reproductive system, histological variation is cyclical. The ovary, enclosed by tunica albuginea, contains a cortex with follicles and a medulla with stroma and vessels. Follicles mature through stages: primordial, primary, secondary, and Graafian, each with distinct granulosa cell layers, zona pellucida, and theca cell layers. After ovulation, the ruptured follicle becomes the corpus luteum, a transient endocrine structure secreting progesterone. The cervix differs. The endocervical canal has mucinous simple columnar epithelium, while the ectocervix transitions to stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, creating a transformation zone, a key site for dysplasia and screening. The vagina, a fibromuscular tube, is lined by non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium over dense connective tissue, rich in elastic fibers. No glands are present. Lubrication is provided by transobeded and cervical secretions. Smooth muscle layers and adventitious support distension and resilience. The immune system, spread across multiple organs, is histologically distinct for its lymphoid tissues and immune cell populations. It comprises primary lymphoid organs, bone marrow, hematopoiesis, B-cell maturation, and thymus, T-cell maturation. Secondary lymphoid organs, lymph nodes, spleen, tonsils, Peyer's patches, and malt. The thymus, active in youth, has cortex and medulla. The cortex is densely packed with immature thymocytes supported by epithelial reticular cells. The medulla contains fewer lymphocytes and Hassel's corpuscles, hordils of epithelial cells. Lymph nodes filter lymph. Their cortex houses lymphoid follicles, primary resting or secondary with germinal centers. The paracortex contains T cells and high endothelial venules, HEEVs, which mediate lymphocyte entry. The medulla, with medullary cords and sinuses, allows macrophage-based filtration and antibody secretion. Tonsils, palatine, lingual, and pharyngeal are epithelial lymphoid interfaces. Palatine tonsils have crypts lined by stratified squamous epithelium, allowing antigen contact. Beneath lies lymphoid tissue with follicles ready for immune activation. The spleen filters blood. Its white pulp surrounds arterioles and contains lymphocytes. The red pulp, with cords of Billroth and sinusoids, filters and recycles erythrocytes. The sinusoidal endothelium is fenestrated and supported by reticular fibers, aiding in blood cell migration. Peyer's patches, aggregated lymphoid nodules in the ileum, extend from the mucosa into the submucosa. Mem cells in the overlying epithelium sample luminal antigens and present them to immune cells below. The epidermis is keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium composed of layers. The integumentary system, skin and appendages, provides barrier, sensory input, thermoregulation, and vitamin D synthesis. The skin has two major layers, epidermis, epithelial, and dermis, connective tissue. A deeper hypodermis, subcutaneous fat, insulates and cushions. Stratum spinosum, desmosome-linked keratinocytes. Stratum basal, mitotic keratinocytes, melanocytes, and Merkel cells. Stratum granulosum, keratohyaline granules, and lipid production. The dermis contains stratum lucidum, seen in thick skin. Stratum corneum, dead keratinized cells forming the protective barrier. Papillary layer, loose connective tissue, capillaries, and sensory endings. Reticular layer, dense irregular connective tissue with glands, hair follicles, and vessels. Sweat glands include exocrine, thermoregulation, coiled tubular glands opening on the skin. Abrasion, scent-associated, limited to axillae and groin, opening into follicles. Sebaceous glands secrete lipid-rich sebum into hair follicles. The secretion is holocrine cells ruptured to release contents. Hair follicles derived from epidermis are supported by dermal papillae and enveloped by connective tissue sheaths. Nails and sensory receptors, Meissner's corpuscles, light touch, and Pacinian corpuscles, vibration, complete the integument's sensory capacity. Next, we turn to integration, how microscopic elements collectively uphold the macroscopic human organism. These systems are not static. They remodel, respond, and regenerate, reflecting a histology of life's renewal and resilience. Integration begins with communication. Cell signaling, junctional complexes, and extracellular matrix feedback form the connective syntax between histological units. Epithelial cells use tight junctions to seal surfaces, desmosomes to anchor, and gap junctions to exchange ions and signals. Connective tissues sense mechanical stress through integrins, which relay tension from extracellular matrix to cytoskeleton, altering gene expression. You are composed of trillions of cells organized into distinct tissues, coordinated through complex organ systems, yet unified by microscopic continuity. This final section draws those threads together, illuminating how histology serves as the material logic of life, the way tissues sustain, adapt, repair, and evolve in concert. In a wound, this network activates. Skin trauma recruits platelets first, releasing chemokines that summon neutrophils, then monocytes, which become macrophages, clearing debris. Fibroblasts proliferate, depositing collagen. Keratinocytes migrate to cover the wound. Endothelial cells form new capillaries, a process called angiogenesis. Histologically, the tissue transitions from inflammation to granulation to remodeling, finally restoring a layered architecture. Regeneration varies by tissue. Epithelium, especially of skin or gut, renews rapidly. Stem cells in the basal layer divide continuously. Liver hepatocytes can replicate after injury, restoring architecture, but neurons and cardiac muscle show limited turnover. Histologically, their damage is met not with regeneration, but gliosis or fibrosis, glial proliferation or scar formation. Homeostasis requires surveillance. Endocrine signals, hormones like insulin, cortisol, or thyroxine act at distant sites. These secretions arise from richly vascularized epithelia, often arranged in cords or follicles. The feedback loops that govern them are reflected histologically: enlarged adrenal cortex in chronic stress, or thyroid hyperplasia and iodine deficiency. Form follows regulation. Inflammation is the histological language of alarm. In any tissue, vasodilation, increased permeability, and immune infiltration mark the acute response. Chronic inflammation, however, alters architecture. Persistent macrophages, lymphocytes, and fibroblasts form granulomas or fibrotic scars. In organs like liver or lung, this leads to loss of function. Recognizing such changes in histology allows clinicians to infer underlying processes. Tissue identity is not fixed. Under stress, cells can metaplastically transform, as in chronic smoking, where pseudostratified columnar epithelium of bronchi may become stratified squamous, more protective but less functional. Such changes are reversible until repeated insults lead to dysplasia, disordered growth that may progress to neoplasia. Histology also encodes time. Age-related changes, flattened dermal, epidermal junctions, reduced glandular secretion, lipofuscin accumulation reveal how tissues respond to decades of wear. In the nervous system, neuronal loss, amyloid plaques, and neurofibrillary tangles mark cognitive decline. In the vasculature, intimal thickening, elastic fragmentation, and calcification mark arterial aging. Neoplasia disrupts histological order. Benign tumors maintain differentiation and architecture, malignant ones do not. Invasive carcinomas breach the basement membrane, elicit desmoplastic stroma, and show anaplasia, cellular atypia, high nuclear cytoplasmic ratios, and abnormal mitosis. Histology remains the gold standard in diagnosis. Frozen sections in surgery, biopsies under microscope, staining patterns revealing origin and behavior. Modern techniques expand this view. Immunohistochemistry uses antibodies to identify proteins, pinpointing origins of metastases or hormonal status of tumors. In situ hybridization detects genetic sequences useful in infections or cancers. Electron microscopy reveals ultrastructural details, mitochondrial cristae, synaptic vesicles, basal lamina fibrils beyond the light microscope's range. Yet amid these technologies, the fundamentals endure. The color of eosin-stained cytoplasm, the architecture of a renal corpuscle, the lamellar pattern of bone, or the layered complexity of skin, all ground medical reasoning in form. Histology also teaches humility. You may consider tissues stable, yet they change constantly, shaped by diet, stress, environment, genetics. Each slide under the microscope is a moment, a snapshot of health or disease in progress. Understanding these moments allows clinicians to anticipate outcomes, researchers to find targets, educators to train minds. Histology is not just structure, it is dynamic biography written in cells. Every tissue you've seen tonight was once invisible to the unaided eye. Now you know what lies beneath, how it functions, and how it changes. This is not just academic knowledge, it's a quiet intimacy with the machinery of being alive. Next, we conclude with a soft landing, a gentle reflection to accompany rest. As you ease into rest, let your awareness settle into the intricate architecture you now carry more consciously. Every breath moves across an epithelium lined with cilia and mucus, quietly filtering the air. Beneath your skin, connective tissues hold your form with both strength and fluidity. With every heartbeat, smooth and cardiac muscles contract in precise rhythm without effort or command. And in the silence of the night, your neurons still whisper across synapses, preserving memory, regulating systems, maintaining your internal world. This microscopic foundation, these tissues, these cells are not abstractions. They are the scaffolding of experience. As you lie still, your endocrine glands modulate, your immune sentinels patrol, and your skin renews. The language of histology, though clinical and precise, describes something deeply human, the capacity to sustain, to repair, and to connect. Tonight, let that knowledge be enough. Let it wrap around you as securely as fascia binds muscle, as intimately as astrocytes cradle neurons. You need not remember every detail. Your body already lives them,